The Terms of Forever. A novel. For every woman who was told she was inconvenient. And for every man who learned too late that love is not a weakness. A note on the story. This is a story about a mistake. But perhaps there are no mistakes. Perhaps it only makes corrections, steering us, sometimes violently, toward the lives we were always meant to live. This is a story about a woman named Nadia Reeves, who walked into a hospital on a Tuesday morning for a procedure she had been dreading for months, and walked out carrying a life she had never planned for. And it is a story about a man named Callum Hale, brilliant, controlled, and profoundly alone, who had decided with the same cold precision he applied to everything, exactly how he would have a child and with whom and under what terms. Neither of them could have imagined what was coming. Neither of them would have chosen it. And yet. Chapter 1. Nadia. The morning Nadia Reeves's life changed forever smelled like rain and burned coffee and the particular antiseptic sharpness of a hospital corridor that no amount of floral air freshener could ever fully disguise. She arrived at Mercy Grace Medical Center at 7:45 in the morning, 15 minutes early because she had been raised by a woman who believed that being on time was a form of disrespect and being early was the only civilized option. She had her registration paperwork in a manila folder. Organized, tabbed because that was simply how Nadia did things. And she had her insurance card and her driver's license and the notes from her gynecologist, Dr. Patricia Osei, who had referred her to the fertility and reproductive health wing on the 4th floor with the gentle gravity of a woman who had learned how to deliver difficult news without making a patient feel like she was dying. Nadia was 26 years old. She had warm brown skin and dark eyes that people always said were too expressive. You can never hide what you're thinking, her mother used to say. You wear every feeling on your face like a billboard. And hair she kept natural and twisted back on work days in a way that made her look, she thought, more professional, and that her boyfriend Marcus said made her look severe, which she had stopped arguing about because there were certain battles with Marcus that simply weren't worth the energy. She was 5'4" and she had a way of carrying herself that was quiet but firm. The posture of a woman who had learned early that the world didn't always make room for you and sometimes you had to carve it out yourself. She was a middle school art teacher at Jefferson Prep, a charter school in the Bronx, and she was genuinely good at it. Not good in the way of someone who had simply found a stable job and decided to stay, but good in the way that made 12-year-olds who had never once believed they were creative suddenly sit down in front of a blank canvas and not want to stop. She had a studio apartment on Fordham Road that she had decorated with prints she couldn't quite afford and plants she kept alive through sheer stubbornness, and a cat named Rothko who had the personality of a disgruntled art critic and whom she loved absolutely. Marcus had offered the night before to come with her, and she had said it was fine. She would be fine, it was just a procedure, not a big deal, and he had accepted this with a relief that was a little too obvious and a little too quick. And she had lain awake afterward listening to him breathe and thinking about how often, lately, his relief at being let off the hook had been more visible than his disappointment at not being needed. He was not going to think about Marcus right now. The 4th floor of Mercy Grace had the look of a place that had been designed by someone who understood that medical spaces frightened people and had made a genuine attempt to soften the edges. There were watercolor prints on the walls in soft greens and blues, and the chairs in the waiting area were a warm dove gray. And there was a small table with a coffee machine and a bowl of individually wrapped granola bars that looked as though someone had restocked them recently. It was 7:50 in the morning and the waiting area was already half full. 2 women sat across from each other, both in their 30s, both looking at their phones with the particular focused blankness of people who were using their screens as a shield against the weight of where they were. A couple sat in the corner, the man with his hand over the woman's hand, both of them staring at nothing in the same direction with the shared quiet of people who had run out of reassuring things to say and had decided that silence was better than lies. Nadia signed in at the front desk. The woman behind the desk had reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not look up when she slid the clipboard across. Nadia Reeves? Yes. Date of birth. March 17, 1999. And you're here for the diagnostic laparoscopy? Yes. Nadia said it easily because she had practiced saying it easily. She had been saying it easily since Dr. Osei had written the referral 6 weeks ago, and she had gotten quite good at it. A diagnostic laparoscopy. A small surgery. They were going in to look to see whether the endometriosis that Dr. Osei suspected from her symptoms and her ultrasounds was actually there, and if so, how extensive it was, and then they would know what they were dealing with and they would make a plan. It was routine. It was fine. What she had not gotten quite good at was the thought that had come after, the one she had been quietly carrying since that appointment 6 weeks ago when Dr. Osei had used the word endometriosis and then gently, carefully, almost in passing, had mentioned that in some cases, if left untreated it could affect fertility, and that Nadia was young but it was something to be aware of. Dr. Osei had moved on quickly. She had talked about treatment options and the procedure and follow-up care. But Nadia had heard only the word fertility and had felt something shift very slightly in her chest. The way a building settles after an earthquake. Nothing visible on the outside but something essential had moved. She had not told Marcus about that part. She had told him it was a minor procedure to check on some pain she'd been having, and he had nodded and said that sounded like no big deal and she had agreed that it was no big deal and she had been agreeing ever since. She took a seat near the window. The city stretched out below in the particular gray-gold light of a November morning, all water towers and brick and the silver glint of the East River in the distance. She liked New York in November when the tourists had thinned out and the trees in the parks had gone bare and the city settled into itself and became somehow more honest. She had come here from Columbus, Ohio at 18 for art school, and she had stayed because she had never once felt the pull to leave, the way some people felt the pull toward open space and quiet. She needed this city the way some people needed landscape. She needed its noise, its density, the way it pressed against you from all sides and forced you to take up space or be swallowed. She took out her phone and put it away again. She looked at the couple in the corner. She thought about Marcus's relief. A nurse appeared at the door to the corridor and called her name. The nurse who took her back was named Diane, and she was efficient and kind in that specific way of experienced nurses. Not warm exactly but competent and humane, which Nadia found more comforting than warmth would have been. She took Nadia's vitals, noted her blood pressure, slightly elevated, which Nadia attributed to anxiety and Diane attributed to the same thing without saying so, and handed her a gown and a bag for her belongings and a pair of gripper socks that were a cheerful yellow, which felt like a small act of institutional optimism. "The anesthesiologist will be in shortly," Diane said. "Dr. Marchetti is running slightly behind but she'll come to speak with you before we start. Do you have any questions?" Nadia had 700 questions, none of which she could articulate. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." She changed into the gown. She folded her clothes with the automatic neatness of someone who had been doing her own laundry since she was 11. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. She was fine. This was fine. She was going to go to sleep and wake up and know something she hadn't known before, and knowing was always better than not knowing. He had always believed that. He believed it now. She was still believing it when a different nurse, not Diane, a younger woman with a rushed energy and a tablet in her arms, came in and confirmed her name and her date of birth and asked her to sign a supplemental consent form. "For the procedure," the young nurse said, already moving to the next thing. Nadia signed. She did not read it carefully. She had read everything she'd been given already twice and she was tired of reading and wanted to be on the other side of this morning. She did not know, because there was no reason she could have known, that somewhere on the 4th floor in a room 3 doors down the hall, a clerical error had already been made. A patient with a similar last name, Reyes not Reeves, had been checked in and processed, and somewhere in the system, in the way that errors migrate through systems when no one is paying quite enough attention, a file had been attached to the wrong chart. She did not know that Dr. Marchetti, who came in 20 minutes later and was brisk and competent and apologized for the delay, was looking at a tablet that contained her name and date of birth and medical history, her file correctly, but had been briefed by the coordinator on a procedure that was not hers. She did not know any of this. She only knew that the anesthesiologist had kind eyes and a voice that was deliberate and unhurried, and that the medication going into her felt like being wrapped in very warm, very heavy water, and that she thought just before she stopped thinking about the trees in Fordham Park that had gone bare last week and how there was something almost relieving about that, the stripping away everything laid bare and honest. She thought, "I will know something true when I wake up." And then she slept. What happened while Nadia slept was this. In a suite down the corridor, a 41-year-old woman named Sylvia Reyes had come in for an intrauterine insemination procedure. Specifically, the transfer of an embryo that had been created using her own eggs, harvested 6 months prior, and donor sperm. It was her 3rd attempt. The first 2 had not resulted in pregnancy. She was a woman of considerable determination, and she had prepared for this 3rd attempt with the thoroughness of someone who had stopped believing in luck and begun believing only in repetition. But Sylvia Reyes had woken up that morning with a fever of 102 degrees. Her husband had called the clinic at 6:30. There had been a conversation and a decision, and a note entered into her chart that her procedure was to be postponed, rescheduled, held. The embryo that had been prepared for her, viable, healthy, ready, was already in the lab. And the note about the postponement, due to a series of cascading small failures of the kind that happen in large institutions where the communication chain has one too many links, did not reach the procedure team in time. Sylvia Reyes's embryo was transferred that morning. Nadia Reeves. Nadia woke up in the recovery room at 11:47 in the morning with a dry mouth and a dull, heavy ache low in her abdomen that she had been told to expect. Diane was there, or a version of Diane. The efficiency was the same. Someone brought her apple juice in a small plastic cup. Someone brought her crackers. The ache was manageable. She had been told it would be manageable. Everything went smoothly, a woman in scrubs told her. Nadia thought it was Dr. Marchetti but wasn't certain. The anesthesia was still blurring the edges of things. You'll get the full results in a few days. Dr. Osei's office will be in touch. Thank you, Nadia said. She had been saying thank you all morning. It was the only thing that felt equal to the situation. She called Marcus from the recovery room. He answered after 4 rings. Hey, how did it go? Fine, she said. It went fine. I'm in recovery. I'll take the subway back. You sure? I can come. It's fine, Marcus. Really? There was a pause. She could hear the television in the background. Hey, he said. Text me when you're heading back. She sat in the recovery room for another 40 minutes, sipping juice, watching a woman across the room sleep with her mouth open and her hands folded on her stomach like a child. Outside the window, the city went about its morning. Somewhere below, on the street, 2 taxis were leaning on their horns in the way that always struck Nadia as less like aggression and more like conversation. A language of impatience, the city expressing itself. He felt strange. She had expected to feel strange. She'd been under general anesthesia. She'd had a camera inside her body. Strange was the reasonable thing to feel. But this was a different kind of strange. Not physical. Something else, some murmur she didn't have a word for, something that felt almost like recognition, though of what she couldn't have said. She told herself it was the medication. She took the subway home. 3 weeks later, Nadia Reeves stood in her bathroom at 6:30 in the morning staring at a pregnancy test with the particular stillness of a person whose entire understanding of her own life has just been revised without her consent. 2 lines. She had taken it because she had been nauseous for a week and a half. Not dramatically, not debilitatingly, but persistently, a low seasick feeling that came and went and mostly came in the morning. And because her period was 11 days late, which was unusual because Nadia's cycle ran with the accuracy of a woman who had been tracking it for 4 years because of the endometriosis symptoms. 11 days. She had been attributing it to stress. She had been attributing the nausea to stress too. She was a woman who attributed a great deal to stress because stress was logical and logical things were manageable, and Nadia, above everything, needed things to be manageable. 2 lines were not manageable. 2 lines did not make any sense whatsoever. She and Marcus were careful, not in a fearful way but in the straightforward, responsible way of 2 adults who were not planning to have children at 26 and 30, who had not talked about children seriously, who had other things happening in their lives. She had not been with anyone. He had not. The hospital. The thought arrived quietly and then it was very loud. The hospital. She sat down on the edge of the tub. Rothko pushed the bathroom door open, looked at her with the flat, evaluating gaze of a cat who had decided she was not interesting enough to merit intervention, and left. She sat there for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Mercy Grace Medical Center. Chapter 2. Callum. 3 weeks before Nadia Reeves sat on the edge of her bathtub with a pregnancy test in her hand, a man named Callum Hale sat in the offices of his attorney Vincent Park, on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, and listened to Vincent explain for the 3rd time exactly what the surrogacy contract contained, and felt nothing. This was not unusual. Callum felt things, but he felt them at a remove, the way you feel the temperature of water before you step into it. Acknowledged, assessed, acted upon or not, but never surrendered to. He was 34 years old and he had been this way for as long as he could remember, which his therapist had once suggested was a coping mechanism and which Callum had described as simply a personality trait. And they had gone back and forth on this point productively for about 4 sessions before he discontinued therapy on the grounds that he didn't have time. He was the founder and CEO of Hale Capital Partners, a private equity and real estate development firm that, in 11 years, he had built from a two-person office in a sublet space in Chelsea into a company that managed $4.7 billion in assets and had development projects in 8 American cities and 3 international markets. He was, by most measures, extraordinary at what he did. He was also known, among the people who worked for him and the people who competed with him and the journalists who occasionally profiled him in publications that covered the intersection of money and ambition, as a man who was controlled, exacting, and utterly disinterested in the social performance of warmth. He was not unkind. People who described him as cold were using the wrong word. He was precise. He gave exactly what was warranted and withheld what was not, and he applied this principle to everything from business decisions to personal interactions with the consistency of a man who had thought carefully about how he wanted to move through the world and had simply been doing it ever since. He was 6'2" and dark-haired and had the build of a man who made time for the gym not out of vanity but out of discipline, because discipline in one area reinforced discipline in others, and Callum had learned this early and integrated it completely. He had gray eyes that people described variously as cold, arresting, or beautiful depending on how they felt about him, and a jaw that was always clean-shaven because he disliked untidiness in his own presentation even when he was entirely alone. He wore clothes that cost a great deal and looked as though they cost nothing. Not out of affectation but because he preferred simplicity, and simplicity in well-made things happened to be expensive. He had never been in love. He was not, as far as he could determine, the kind of person who would be. He had had relationships, several spanning his 20s and the first years of his 30s, with women who were accomplished and interesting and, in some cases, extraordinary, and who had ended these relationships, each of them on the grounds that they could not reach him, that there was a door somewhere inside Callum Hale that simply did not open, and that eventually they had gotten tired of knocking. He did not argue with this assessment. He thought it was probably accurate. He did not believe that this made him a tragic figure. He believed it made him a realistic one. Some people were built for love and some people were not. He had made his peace with which category he occupied. What he had not made his peace with, what had been growing in him quietly for the last 2 years and had arrived finally, a year ago as something close to urgency, was the fact that he wanted a child. He could not entirely explain it. He had thought about it for a long time, the way he thought about everything, systematically, thoroughly, from multiple angles. It was not sentimentality. It was not loneliness exactly, though there were certain evenings in his apartment on the Upper East Side, in the particular silence of a space that was perfectly ordered and perfectly empty, when he felt the absence of something he couldn't name. It was not legacy, though he was aware that was part of it. He had built something and there was something in him that wanted the continuity of having someone to pass it to, someone who was his, who carried something of him forward. But mostly, and this was the part he found hardest to articulate, he simply wanted the experience of being someone's father. He wanted to be responsible for a life in that specific way. He wanted to watch something grow. He was 34 years old and he had spent his entire adult life building and managing and expanding, and he wanted for the first time to do something that was not about control or profit or scale but simply about love, the one form of it he thought himself capable of, the love of a parent for a child. So he had done what Callum Hale did with all complex problems. He had assessed his options. He had dismissed the ones that didn't fit. He had constructed a plan. He did not want a romantic relationship with a woman to have this child. He had tried sincerely and he knew his limitations. He did not want to adopt. He had examined this option without prejudice, but he wanted the experience of a child who was biologically his. He did not want a casual arrangement that left room for ambiguity. He wanted clarity, legal and practical and emotional, from the very beginning. He had spent 8 months working with a specialized fertility attorney and a reputable agency. He had chosen a gestational surrogate with extraordinary care, reading applications and meeting women with the same thoroughness he brought to hiring senior executives. He had settled, eventually, on a woman named Andrea Thorne, 31 years old, married, mother of 2 healthy children, a part-time bookkeeper from Connecticut who was warm and grounded and had surrogated once before and had done so without drama or complication or any of the emotional volatility that he had been told occasionally complicated these arrangements. She had undergone every medical and psychological screening available. She had agreed to the terms. The contract was, by Vincent Parks Accounting, airtight. The egg donor was equally carefully chosen, a 28-year-old PhD candidate in molecular biology at Columbia, healthy, No family history of genetic illness, who had donated twice before through the same agency. Her identity was known to the agency but not to Callum, per her preference, and he had agreed to this because he didn't need to know. The child would be his and his alone, legally and emotionally, and the donor would have no parental rights or obligations. This too was airtight. The embryo had been created and tested and cleared. Everything was in order. Andrea Thorne's procedure was scheduled for the following Tuesday. "You've read the full contract?" Vincent asked, though both of them knew he had. 3 times, Callum said. "It's fine, Vincent. Move forward." Vincent nodded. He had worked with Callum for 7 years and had learned not to look for the emotional temperature beneath the surface, because it only occasionally appeared and only briefly. "There's one more thing," he said, setting a folder on the desk. "The clinic called this morning. There's been a..." He paused, choosing the word carefully. "Complication." Callum looked at him. "Andrea Thorne called in sick this morning. Fever. They've postponed her procedure." There was a silence. "Until when?" "They're recommending a 4-week window. To be certain she's fully recovered." Dr. Lena Kwan's recommendation. Callum said nothing for a moment. 4 weeks was 4 weeks. He was a man who understood that not everything could be controlled, who had built his ability to manage the uncontrollable into a genuine competency. 4 weeks was fine. He could wait 4 weeks. "All right," he said. "Let me know when they've rescheduled." He left Vincent's office. His driver was waiting. He had a meeting at 1 o'clock and a call at 3 and a dinner with the CFO of a real estate investment trust that he had been courting for 14 months and that was finally close to closing. He got into the car and looked at his phone. He had 12 unread emails and a message from his assistant Priya that said dinner confirmed. The pool, 7 p.m. Mr. Fitzgerald is bringing 2 associates. He typed back a thumbs up and set his phone down. He looked out at the city through the window. It was a cold morning, the sky the particular flat white of November in New York, and the streets were glossy with recent rain. He watched a woman struggle with an umbrella that had inverted itself in the wind and felt very briefly, something he couldn't name, not pity, not precisely, but some small recognition of the human comedy of being caught off guard. He looked away. He did not think about the embryo already in the lab. He did not think about what had been done with it or who had received it. He would not know any of that for another 3 weeks. For 3 more weeks, Callum Hale's life was intact and ordered and entirely his, moving along its tracks with the precision he had always insisted upon. He thought about the dinner at 7. He thought about Fitzgerald. He thought about the clothes. He was very good at this. At keeping his eyes exactly where they needed to be. Callum had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house that was large and quiet and meticulously maintained, which told you almost everything you needed to know about his childhood if you understood that meticulously maintained can describe both a home and the absence of the kind of productive disorder that children need. His father, Richard Hale, was a man who had made a considerable amount of money in financial services and who expressed love primarily through the giving of things and the imposing of standards and who did not know how to simply be with another person without it becoming, somehow, a performance. His mother, Eleanor Hale, was beautiful and contained and had the particular grace of a woman who had learned very early to want only what she was likely to get. They were not cruel people. They were not neglectful people. They simply were not warm, and they had raised a son who had grown up with all of his material needs comprehensively met and almost none of his emotional ones even acknowledged, and who had learned, therefore, that emotional needs were a private matter, perhaps a weakness, that a serious person managed quietly and did not impose on others. He had one sibling, a sister named Claire, 5 years younger, who had fought her way out of the family template with more success than he had and now lived in Portland with her husband and 2 dogs and a very deliberate distance from the Greenwich house that Callum had learned to respect without entirely understanding. He and Claire spoke once a month, usually on Sunday mornings. She was the only person in his life who talked to him like a human being rather than a category. Formidable businessman, excellent client, difficult partner. And he valued this more than he had ever told her. He had called her last spring to tell her about the surrogacy plan. There had been a long pause. "You're going to have a baby," Claire had said in the tone of someone confirming information they're not sure they've received correctly. "Yes." "By yourself?" "Yes." Another pause. "How do you feel about that, Callum?" "I feel it's the right decision." "That's not what I asked." He had let the silence sit for a moment. "I'm glad," he had said finally. I think glad is the word. Claire had been quiet for a bit longer than was comfortable. Then, you know what, I actually believe you. I just worry that a baby is messier than you're expecting. I've accounted for that. Babies don't care what you've accounted for. I'm aware. Callum. Claire. A soft sound, not quite a laugh. Just keep me updated, okay? I want to know how this goes. He had promised he would. He had been, in his way, looking forward to the call he would make when there was a child to report. He had been looking forward in his way to a great many things. He did not know, sitting in the back of the car while it moved through midtown traffic, that the event which would unravel and then reconstruct his entire careful plan had already occurred. That it was already, in the most literal biological sense, underway. He did not know that the woman carrying the beginning of his most private hope was sitting, at that very moment, on a subway car headed to the Bronx, feeling slightly nauseated, attributing it to stress. He did not know her name. Not yet. Chapter 3, 2 lines and a phone call. The woman at the patient services desk at Mercy Grace Medical Center on the morning that Nadia called had a voice like a woman who had answered 10,000 difficult calls and had made peace with this. She was professional. She listened. I was a patient in your reproductive health unit on November 4th, Nadia said. Her voice was very steady. She was sitting at her kitchen table with both hands flat on the surface in front of her, the way she sometimes sat during difficult conversations with school administrators. Grounded. Little. Here. I had a diagnostic laparoscopy. And I need to speak with someone because I've just found out I'm pregnant, and I need someone to explain to me how that happened. There was a careful pause. I understand, the woman said. I'm going to transfer you to the nurse coordinator for that unit. Can you hold? Nadia held. She looked at Rothko, who was sitting on the kitchen counter observing her with the same detached interest he brought to all crises. The morning light was thin and pale through the window. On the counter, the pregnancy test was still where she had left it. 2 lines. Both of them undeniable. She had not told Marcus yet. She had taken the test and come to sit at the table before he stirred because she always needed, to understand something herself before she let anyone else near it. The hold music was some kind of soft jazz that was clearly designed to be inoffensive and had achieved its goal with depressing thoroughness. Ms. Reeves? This is Janet Cole. I'm the nurse coordinator for the reproductive health unit. I understand you have a concern about, I'm pregnant, Nadia said clearly. I came in on November 4th for a diagnostic laparoscopy for suspected endometriosis. I was under general anesthesia. I woke up and I was told the procedure went smoothly. I am now pregnant, which is not something that should be possible from a laparoscopy, and I need to understand what happened. Another careful pause. Longer this time. Ms. Reeves, I want to take this seriously and look into it properly. Can I ask, are you certain about the pregnancy? I've taken 2 tests. Both positive. My period is 11 days late. And is there any possibility? No, Nadia said. Firmly. There is no possibility of another explanation. My partner and I wouldn't be in this situation. I have not been with anyone. The timing aligns with my procedure date. So I need you to tell me what happened in that room. The silence that followed was the silence of a person on the other end of a phone who has just understood that something has gone very wrong. Ms. Reeves, Janet Cole said slowly, I want you to come in. I think we need to speak in person. There are things I need to verify before I can say anything with confidence. But I want to assure you that we are taking this very seriously and we are going to get to the bottom of it. When? Nadia asked. Today if possible. Can you come in this afternoon? Nadia looked at the pregnancy test. She looked at Rothko. She thought about Marcus, still asleep in the bedroom, who did not know any of this yet. Yes, she said. I'll be there at 2. She told Marcus when he got up at 9:30. Or rather, she told him the pregnancy test result, because that was the part she could tell him with certainty. The rest, the call to the hospital, the appointment, the possibility that was not yet a certainty but that had taken on the specific gravitational weight of something she already believed, she held back because she could not yet explain it in terms that would make it land correctly, and she needed it to land correctly. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, holding the coffee she had made him, and stared at the test she had placed on the counter. He was 30 years old, Marcus Webb, and he was handsome in a comfortable, friendly way, and he worked in marketing, and he was the kind of person who was well liked by everyone who met him, Charming, easy, quick to laugh. He and Nadia had been together for 2 years and she loved him, she did, but lately she had been aware of a growing distance between the person she needed him to be and the person he actually was, and she had been very carefully not examining this awareness because examining it led places she wasn't ready to go. He looked at the test for a long time. "That's positive," he said. "Yes. We were careful." "I know." He looked up at her. "How is this possible?" And here Nadia had a choice, and she made the one she had already decided to make. She told him she didn't know yet, that she had a doctor's appointment that afternoon, that they would know more soon. He held back the rest. She watched his face move through shock and then a particular blankness she recognized. It was the look he got when something arrived that he hadn't budgeted for emotionally, and she knew from 2 years of partnership that when this happened, he needed time to process before he could be useful, and she didn't have time to wait for him to be useful right now. "Hey," Marcus said. He set down his coffee. He ran a hand over his face. "Hey. So we'll know more today?" "Yes." He looked at her. Something moved in his expression, not the thing she needed but something. "Are you okay?" he asked. And Nadia, who was fundamentally honest and who was very much not okay, said, "I'm handling it." Which was, she reflected, a very different thing from okay, in which Marcus, to his credit, seemed to understand. He put down his coffee and came to where she was sitting and put his hand on the back of her neck, and she leaned into it for a moment because she was human and she needed a moment, and it helped. But it didn't help enough. She arrived at Mercy Grace at 2 o'clock. She was taken to a private consultation room, not the waiting area, not the standard rooms, a specific consultation room with a door and a round table and a box of tissues placed with the careful intentionality of a place that expected difficult conversations. Janet Cole came in with a woman named Dr. Sandra Weiss, who was the department head of the reproductive health unit, and who had the bearing of a person carrying something that they are not yet sure how to put down. They sat. They offered her water. He took it. Dr. Weiss began. She spoke carefully and methodically, the way people speak when they are trying to give information and prepare a person at the same time, and what she said was this: that on the morning of November 4th a clerical error had occurred involving a patient with a similar last name. That the embryo prepared for that patient, which should not have been used that morning, given that the patient in question had been withdrawn from the procedure due to illness, had been transferred to Nadia instead of the scheduled procedure being performed. That this had been discovered in the course of investigating Nadia's call that morning. She used words like deeply regret and full investigation and entirely unacceptable, and Nadia heard all of them from a great distance, the way you hear voices in a dream, present but not quite real, arriving through a medium that changes everything. "So I'm carrying someone else's embryo," Nadia said when Dr. Weiss had finished. Pause. "Yes." "Someone else's genetic material." "Yes." "The embryo was created using the intended patient's own eggs and..." Dr. Weiss paused, consulting the file in front of her with care. "And donor sperm that was not matched to the intended patient by a named donor. It was the sperm of a known party. The individual who commissioned the embryo." Nadia turned this over. "So there is a father. A specific person. Who wanted this embryo created." "Yes." "Does he know?" "We are in the process of notifying him. This is being handled simultaneously." Nadia sat for a moment with this. The room was very quiet. Through the single small window she could see a narrow strip of sky, the flat pale white of the afternoon. She thought about Dr. Osei saying it could affect fertility. She thought about the morning light in her apartment and the 2 lines on the test. She thought about the thing she had felt waking up in the recovery room, that strange murmur, that sense of something that she hadn't had a word for. He had thought it was the medication. "What happens now?" she asked. Dr. Weiss and Janet Cole exchanged a look. "We want to first ensure your well-being," Dr. Weiss said. "We want to have an obstetrician see you today. And then..." She paused. "There are options. There are a number of options available to you, and we want to make sure you have access to full counseling and support before you make any decisions." Options. The word sat in the room. Nadia was 26 years old. She was a middle school art teacher in the Bronx. She lived alone with a cat named Rothko in a studio apartment on Fordham Road. She was in a relationship that had been showing her for several months small and consistent signs that it was not built for weight. She was not ready to be pregnant. She was also, she realized, sitting in this quiet room with its box of tissues and its round table, already certain of one thing. Already though it had no logic and no practical basis, and Marcus would likely not understand it, and she could not have articulated it to anyone in this room, already certain. She was not going to end this pregnancy. She did not know whose embryo it was. She did not know whose careful, deliberate, privately held hope it was. She did not know anything about the man who was even now being called and told what she was being told, or how he was receiving it, or what kind of man he was. She only knew what she knew about herself. And what she knew was, she was carrying a life, however accidentally it had arrived there, and she was not going to end it. Not because she was opposed to the option, she wasn't on principle, but because she was 26 years old and she had been told 6 weeks ago that her fertility might be affected, and something in her was looking at this impossible, unplanned, wrong in every practical way pregnancy and saying, no. She was going to keep this baby. She didn't know what that meant yet. She was about to find out. Chapter 4. Callum Hale loses control of something. Callum was in a meeting. Specifically, he was in the conference room on the 28th floor of Hale Capital Partners, listening to his head of development present slides about a mixed-use project in Nashville that was 14 months away from groundbreaking, when his phone lit up on the table with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He would have let it go to voicemail. He always let unknown numbers go to voicemail during meetings. But the area code was the same as Mercy Grace Medical Center, and he felt, very briefly, the specific alertness of someone whose nervous system has been quietly waiting for this call without their conscious permission. "Excuse me," he said, and picked up the phone and left the room. He took the call in the corridor outside. "Mr. Hale. This is Dr. Sandra Weiss. I'm the department head at the Reproductive Health Unit at Mercy Grace Medical Center. I need to speak with you about a matter of considerable sensitivity. Are you somewhere you can speak privately?" Something in him went very still. "Yes," he said. "Go ahead," she told him. She used the same careful, methodical approach she had used with Nadia. The error, the embryo, the transfer. She told him that the woman who had received the embryo was a patient named Nadia Reeves, that Ms. Reeves had been informed, that she had been confirmed pregnant, and that Ms. Reeves was currently still at the facility speaking with their counseling team. She told him all of it, and Callum stood in the corridor of his office building on a Tuesday afternoon and heard it. He said nothing for a very long moment. "I see," he said finally. The words came from somewhere very far back behind his teeth. "I cannot express how sincerely." "Don't," he said. Not rudely. Just clearly. "Don't express it. Tell me what the legal situation is." Pause. Dr. Weiss had clearly been prepared for this response and unprepared for it at the same time. There are several pathways. In terms of the outcome of the pregnancy, ultimately, legally, the woman carrying the child has the right to make decisions about her own body. We have made options available to Ms. Reeves, and we would strongly encourage. Options, Callum repeated. Termination would. What does she want? Another pause. Longer. Ms. Reeves has not communicated a definitive decision yet. But she hasn't said she'll terminate. The pause was all the answer he needed. Callum closed his eyes for precisely 2 seconds. Something he did sometimes when he needed to not be visible to anyone while he processed something. Then he opened them. "I need Vincent Park on the phone within the next hour," he said. "And I need the name of the best reproductive law attorney in New York. And I need someone to explain to me in specific legal terms exactly what my rights are in this situation. Of course, we have resources we can. I'll find my own resources," he said. "Thank you, Dr. Weiss." He ended the call. He stood in the corridor. He was, by any measurement, a man in full command of himself. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. He did not allow the thing that was moving through him, the anger, cold and enormous, the disbelief, the specific fury of a man who has built every component of a plan to ensure exactly this kind of chaos does not occur and has had that plan violated anyway, to surface in his face or his voice or his hands. But inside, behind the composure, he was furious. The kind of fury that has no heat in it, only weight. He had done everything right. He had chosen Andrea Thorne with meticulous care. He had negotiated a contract that addressed every contingency. He had selected the egg donor with the same rigor he brought to the most complex business decisions of his career. He had done everything that could be done, and some failure in some administrative process at some hospital had undone it all and put his embryo, his genetic material, his child, his carefully considered and deeply private plan, into the body of a stranger. A stranger who might or might not keep it. A stranger who, the longer he stood in that corridor, he found himself increasingly certain was going to keep it. He didn't know why he was certain. He simply was. He had built his entire career on an ability to read situations quickly and accurately, to feel the shape of a thing before all the information was in, and this felt like a woman who was going to say no. He went back into the conference room. From the top, he said, settling back into his chair, his voice steady, his face composed, his hands flat on the table. Let's take it from the top. The meeting continued. He listened. He asked questions. He was, by any observable measure, entirely present. He was entirely somewhere else. He called Claire from his car at 6 o'clock, which was not Sunday morning, which was enough to tell her before he said anything that something had happened. Callum, what's wrong? He told her. He heard her voice change. Not to panic but to the specific quality of attention his sister brought to the things that mattered. Oh God, she said when he finished. Yes. And the woman, Nadia Reeves, she hasn't decided yet? She hasn't said she'll terminate. A beat. Callum. If she decides to keep it. Then I will be involved, he said. This child is biologically mine. I am not going to walk away from my own child because a hospital made an administrative error. No. Claire said slowly. No, I know you won't. Have you thought about what that means? If this woman decides to keep it and raise it herself and you're involved? That's not the arrangement you planned. I'm aware. And the woman you were going to use. Andrea Thorne. That arrangement is clearly dissolved. So you'd be co-parenting. With a stranger. I'd be doing whatever is necessary, Callum said. The child is mine. The situation is not ideal. But I'm not letting my child be raised by a woman I've never met with no involvement from me. Claire was quiet for a moment. Callum, she said more gently than anything she'd said so far. This woman didn't do anything wrong. None of this is her fault. I know that. Do you? Because you're using that tone. What tone? The tone where something has breached your control and you're deciding how to recontain it. Pause. The situation needs to be managed, Claire. The situation is a person. A woman. Who is probably terrified. He didn't say anything. Just, remember that, his sister said. When you meet her. Remember that she's a person, not a variable. He ended the call shortly after. The car moved through traffic. The city was lit up in the November dark, all golden windows and taillights, and Callum looked at it without seeing it. A person, not a variable. He knew that. Of course he knew that. He had his driver take him to his apartment. He poured a glass of scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the park and the city beyond it and drank it slowly. He thought about the embryo. He thought about the plan he had spent 8 months building. He thought about the stranger whose body was now the vessel for the most significant thing he had ever wanted. He thought about meeting her. He thought, we are going to have to reach an agreement. What kind of agreement he did not yet know. But he would figure it out. He always figured things out. He drained the glass. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for an hour, which was unusual for him. He was a man who slept efficiently, who did not lie awake troubled by things. Tonight he lay awake. He stared at the ceiling of his very large, very perfect, very empty apartment, and he thought about a woman he had never met, and about a life that was already beginning to exist outside the boundaries of every plan he had ever made. Chapter 5. The meeting. They met on a Friday. It was arranged through the hospital's mediation team. A neutral space, a conference room at a law office in Midtown that dealt in exactly these kinds of situations. A table between them and 2 attorneys and a mediator named Helen Cho who had the energy of a woman who had seen every possible version of human conflict and had stopped being surprised by any of it. Nadia arrived first. She wore her good coat, the navy wool one she saved for parent-teacher conferences and interviews, and she had her hair down, which she almost never did for professional settings, and she was not sure why she had done it today except that she had stood in front of the mirror this morning and thought, I do not want to look severe. Not today. Not for this. She sat on one side of the table with her attorney, a woman named Deborah Fitch who had been recommended by Nadia's union and who had spent the last 3 days briefing Nadia on her rights with the calm ferocity of a woman who had been doing this for 20 years and who had made it very clear that Nadia held more legal ground than she might think. You are carrying this child, Deborah had said on Wednesday evening over the phone. In the eyes of New York law, that is significant. Whatever the genetic origin of the embryo, you are the one whose body is involved. No one can compel you to do anything with your own body. What we're here to negotiate is what happens after. Nadia had written this down. She had written a lot of things down in the last 3 days because writing things down was how she processed, how she built solid ground under her feet when everything felt like water. She had also in the last 3 days told Marcus everything. That had not gone well. Or rather, it had gone the way Nadia had, somewhere very deep, expected it to go. Marcus had sat across from her in her apartment and listened to the whole story, and when she finished the first thing he said was, "So whose baby is it?" "Genetically, a donor egg and whoever commissioned the procedure." "A stranger." "Yes." He had been quiet for a long time. "And you're keeping it?" Not a question. He had already heard it in her voice. "Yes," she said. Another silence. She watched him work through it. The shock, the confusion, and then she could see it arriving like weather, the thing he was actually feeling underneath all of that. Not grief, not even anger. Relief. The possibility of an exit, gift-wrapped and placed in his hands by the universe. She had hated him for it, briefly and fully, and then she had let the hatred go because it was not really hatred. It was grief. It was the acknowledgement that she had already known, somewhere, that this was not the man she would be with forever, and that the universe had simply decided to make it explicit. "I can't do this," Marcus said. "Nadia. You know I love you, but this isn't. This is somebody else's kid. This is a complete stranger's child," she finished for him. "I know. And you're going to keep it." "Yes." He had left that night. Not in a dramatic way. Marcus was not a dramatic person, which had always been one of his good qualities and which now felt like an insult. He had packed a bag. He had said he needed space. He had said he was sorry. He had looked at the door like a man who was genuinely sorry and also deeply relieved to be leaving. And Nadia had stood in her own doorway in her own apartment and watched him go and had not cried until the elevator doors closed. She had cried for an hour. Rothko had sat on her feet, which was as much comfort as he was capable of offering, and she had accepted it. Then she had washed her face and made tea and sat at the table and opened her notebook. "He wrote things I know." She wrote, "I am pregnant. The baby is not Marcus's. Marcus is gone. I'm keeping this baby. I have a meeting on Friday with the man whose embryo it is." She wrote, "I am terrified." She underlined that one. And then she drew a line under the list and wrote, "Things that are still true regardless." And she wrote, "I have a job. I have an apartment. I have been through hard things before. I will get through this." She underlined that too. Callum walked into the conference room at 2 minutes past the hour, which was for him effectively late. He was always precisely on time, had been his entire adult life, and the 2 minutes were the result of a phone call from his attorney that had gone slightly long and that he had not been willing to cut off because it contained information he needed. He came in with Vincent Park and a second attorney, a reproductive law specialist named James Okafor, who charged a great deal and was worth every dollar. He was not what Nadia had been expecting. She was not sure what she had been expecting. Something harder perhaps. Older. The word wealthy and the word powerful had been doing their work in her imagination for 3 days, building a figure out of angles and cold air, and the man who walked through the door was not that. He was tall and dark-haired and composed in a way that was almost architectural, and when his eyes found hers across the table they were gray and very direct and gave absolutely nothing away. She held his gaze. She had decided she would hold his gaze. He sat down. For a moment, 2 seconds, 3 not more, they simply looked at each other. Two strangers at a table, bound together by a mistake that neither of them had made, and both of them were now living inside. Then Helen Cho began to speak and the moment was over and they were in the meeting. It was 2 hours long. Callum said very little in the first hour, which Nadia found more unnerving than if he had said a great deal. He listened. He consulted quietly with his attorneys. He asked questions that were precise and almost entirely practical, about the timeline, about the medical status, about what monitoring would be required going forward. He did not look at Nadia when he asked these questions. He looked at Helen Cho or at James Okafor, and Nadia had the distinct impression that this was deliberate, that he was choosing very carefully not to address her directly yet. She, in contrast, was watching him openly. She did not believe in performing comfort she did not feel, and she did not feel comfortable, and she was watching him the way she watched anything new and uncertain, directly, with attention, trying to understand the shape of the thing. In the second hour, the practical matters having been established, the conversation shifted. Ms. Reeves, Helen Cho said, has communicated to us that she intends to continue the pregnancy. She felt Callum's attention move to her then. Felt it like a change in the room's temperature. Yes, Nadia said. I'm keeping the baby. Callum looked at her directly for the first time since they'd sat down. May I ask why? He said. His voice was low and even. No aggression in it. Genuine as far as she could tell, though she found him very hard to read. She had prepared for this question. Because I want to, she said. Because I'm 26 years old and I've been told there's a possibility that my fertility could be affected by a condition I may have, and I am pregnant and I intend to stay pregnant. And because this is my body and that is my right. I'm not contesting your right, Callum said. I know you're not. I'm explaining my reasoning. A beat. Something moved in his face, almost nothing but not nothing. All right, he said. I'd also like to be clear, Nadia said. She felt Deborah make the smallest movement beside her, the movement of an attorney who has coached their client and is watching them now diverge very slightly from the script, and she pressed on anyway, that I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking for anything. I understand that none of this is what you planned. I understand you arranged this very carefully and a mistake happened that affected both of us. I'm not trying to leverage this situation. Callum looked at her for a moment. She couldn't tell what he was thinking. She suspected that was always the case with him, that his face was not a place he let things live. That's a generous thing to say, he said. It's an honest thing to say. Another beat. What do you want, then? From this meeting? Nadia drew a breath. I want to know who you are, she said. I want to understand what your intentions are in terms of this child. And I want to have an honest conversation about what happens after the baby is born, because we are going to have to figure that out and I'd rather start figuring it out now in this room, than wait until there's a newborn involved and everyone's emotional and exhausted. Across the table, something shifted very slightly in Callum Hale's expression. It was not warmth exactly. It was something closer to recalibration. Like a man who had arrived at a meeting prepared for one version of the opponent and discovered another. That's also reasonable, he said. I try, Nadia said. What Callum told her in the second hour of that meeting, stripped to its bones, was this. He was not going to abandon his child. He had wanted this child with intention and care, and the circumstances of its creation had changed, but his commitment to being its father had not. He would provide financially, completely and without reservation for the entirety of the pregnancy. He expected, after the birth, to have equal and meaningful parental rights. He expected the child to know who he was. He said all of this clearly and without the performance of feeling. Just the facts laid out. When he finished, Nadia looked at him for a long moment. You love this baby, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Something briefly crossed his face. Something she caught and lost almost simultaneously, like a bird flying across a window. It's my child, he said. I know. But you love it. Already. He didn't answer. Which was, she would come to learn over the following months, a form of answer in itself. Okay, she said. Then we're going to have to learn how to do this together. Yes. I should tell you, she added, that I'm not interested in being managed. I'm not interested in being an arrangement. I'm a person. I'll treat you like one if you do the same for me. The gray eyes held hers. Agreed, he said. It was the first agreement they reached. It would not be the easiest one. Chapter 6. What he offered. 3 days after the meeting, Callum's attorney called Deborah Fitch with a proposal. Nadia sat at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon and listened to Deborah read it to her over the phone while she drank tea, and Rothko walked back and forth across the notebook she'd been writing in as though the words were personally offensive to him. The proposal was comprehensive. Monthly financial support that was, by Nadia's standards, extraordinary. Enough to cover her rent, her living expenses, her medical costs, and then some. Full coverage of all pregnancy-related medical expenses. A dedicated obstetrician at one of the best practices in the city. Postpartum support, including a night nurse for the first 3 months. Legal acknowledgement of his paternity and a co-parenting agreement to be negotiated before the birth. And one more thing. He's proposing, Deborah said with the tone of someone who has read a lot of proposals and finds this one unusual, that you move into his residence for the duration of the pregnancy. Nadia set down her tea. I'm sorry. He has I believe the phrase they used was substantial property on the Upper East Side. He's proposing that you move in for the remainder of the pregnancy so that you have full access to support medical resources, and that he can be present for the pregnancy. Nadia stared at Rothko, who had stopped walking and was sitting in the middle of her notebook, staring back with the expression of an animal who refuses to be surprised by human behavior. Callum's apartment was not what she had imagined, or it was, but it was more than she had imagined in a way that made imagining seem insufficient. It was a penthouse. She had vaguely known this. Simone had found the building online and had said oh my god 4 separate times while scrolling through what Google could show her of it, on the Upper East Side with a view of Central Park, that, when Nadia stepped through the front door and saw it for the first time through the floor-to-ceiling windows, made her actually stop walking. The apartment was large and extraordinarily ordered. Everything was beautiful in the way of things that have been chosen by someone who cares about quality but does not care about warmth, clean lines, expensive materials, a palette of gray and white and deep navy that was elegant and slightly cold. There were almost no personal objects. No photographs. No clutter of any kind. The bookshelves, and there were substantial bookshelves which surprised her, were organized by color and size, which she found somehow more impersonal than organizing by author, and the books themselves were a mix of business and history, and she noticed a significant section of literary fiction that she filed away as information she would look at later. A woman named Ruth, who managed the household and had clearly been briefed to be helpful without being intrusive, showed her to her room. It was large and light-filled and faced the park. The bed had been made with the precision of a hotel. There was a bathroom with heated floors. There was a small sitting area by the window. It was nicer than any room she had ever slept in her life. She set Rothko's carrier down on the floor and opened the door, and he walked out, looked around the room with the measured disapproval of an animal conducting an inspection, and then sat down in the middle of the floor and began to clean himself, which she interpreted as acceptance. Okay, she said to him. We can work with this. She had been in the apartment for 40 minutes when she encountered Callum. He was in the kitchen. A kitchen that had clearly been designed for a person who either cooked seriously or had paid someone to build a kitchen that looked like they cooked seriously. She would later determine it was the former, which surprised her, and he was making coffee. He was in a gray t-shirt and dark trousers, and his feet were bare, and this small domestic detail, bare feet, Callum Hale in his own kitchen in bare feet, undid some of the image she had been building of him and replaced it with something more human and slightly more disorienting. He looked up when she came in. You're settled. The room is beautiful, she said. Thank you. It's the largest guest room. As though that explained it entirely, which perhaps it did. She stood at the edge of the kitchen. There was a counter between them. I'll try to stay out of your way, she said. I know this is, she paused. This is unusual. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. He turned back to the coffee machine. Ruth can show you where everything is. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. I'm usually up by 5:30 and I work from home 2 or 3 days a week. I'll let you know those days in advance so you're not surprised. Thank you, she said again. There was a silence that was not quite comfortable. She was aware that they were two people who did not know each other, standing in a kitchen, bound together by something enormous, and that neither of them had a script for this. I make good coffee, she said. Came out sounding like an olive branch, which is what it was. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, very small, very brief. I'll keep that in mind, he said. She went back to her room. She sat on the edge of the beautiful bed. She looked out at the park through the big window, the trees bare and dark against the December sky. All right, she said to Rothko, who had followed her and was now sitting on the window seat like he owned it. Here we go. Chapter 7. The shape of his silence. The first 2 weeks were the quietest of Nadia's life. Not quiet in the sense of peaceful. Quiet in the sense of carefully maintained distance, the kind of quiet that has architecture to it, that someone has built deliberately. Callum was present in the apartment and also almost entirely absent from it. He left early. She could hear him in the kitchen at 5:30, the precise sounds of a man who operated on a schedule. And he returned in the evenings at times that varied but were always after 7. On the days he worked from home, he was in his study with the door closed, and she learned very quickly that the closed door meant closed. This was fine. She hadn't expected companionship. She had expected exactly this, coexistence civil and bounded, and she told herself it was fine. He went to work. She taught her 7th graders color theory and perspective, and she spent a week on Basquiat, which went better than she had expected, producing a series of paintings that were raw and alive in the way that 12-year-old work sometimes was, before self-consciousness arrived and muted everything. She came home. It was strange calling it that, but the alternative was saying I went back to his apartment every time, and that was stranger. And she made dinner, sometimes for herself, and sometimes, if she happened to be making enough, she left a plate on the counter with a note. She wasn't sure why she did that. Habit maybe. She was a woman who had grown up making enough for more than herself, who found cooking for one felt incomplete. The first time she left a plate, she came out of her room at 8 the next morning and found it gone, the dish clean in the drying rack. No note. No comment. But clean. He filed this away. She started to learn the rhythms of him. The early mornings. The coffee, black, no sugar, made in a machine that cost more than her monthly grocery budget and that made an objectively excellent espresso, which she had to give him. The fact that he ran. She could hear the elevator in the mornings sometimes, learned to time it as his departure for a run, and he was always back within 45 minutes. The fact that he read in the evenings. When she happened to be in the living room and he came through, he would sometimes settle at the far end with a book, and they would exist in the same space without speaking, and it was almost, she didn't have the word. Not comfortable, but not terrible. She was 7 weeks pregnant. She was nauseous in the mornings with an enthusiasm that she found simultaneously exhausting and perversely reassuring. Her body knew what it was doing it loudly, was committed. She had started seeing the obstetrician Callum had arranged, Dr. Amar Hughes, at a practice on Park Avenue that Nadia would never have been able to afford on her own, whose competence and warmth were both completely genuine, and who had met Nadia's situation with the specific unflappable professionalism of someone who had seen a great deal and was not going to waste time being shocked by any of it. The embryo transferred successfully, Dr. Hughes had told her at the first appointment. Everything looks exactly as it should. The baby is healthy. The baby is healthy. Nadia had sat with those words for a long time afterward. They had done something to her chest that she was still working out. It was a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week, one of Callum's work-from-home days, that she encountered him in the kitchen for the first time in a way that wasn't transactional. She had come in to make ginger tea because the nausea was bad that evening and ginger was the only thing that reliably helped, and she hadn't expected him to be there. He was at the counter and he was cooking, actually cooking. Not heating something up, but cooking with the focused, economical movements of someone who knew what he was doing in a kitchen. There was something on the stove that smelled extraordinary. She stopped in the doorway. He glanced up. Ginger tea. She blinked. What? You make it every night. The ginger root is in the 2nd drawer. She had not known he'd noticed. She would not have guessed he'd noticed. She moved to the drawer and took out the ginger root, feeling the particular awareness of a person who has discovered they've been observed when they thought they were invisible. What are you making? She asked, because the smell was genuinely remarkable and she was pregnant and her relationship with food was currently very extreme. Pasta al limon. He turned to stir something. I cook on Wednesdays. Why Wednesdays? A brief pause. It started in business school. Wednesdays were the longest days. It became a habit. She leaned against the counter, keeping a careful distance, and began slicing ginger. Do you enjoy it? Cooking. He considered this in the way she'd noticed he considered most questions, fully without rushing to an answer. Yes, he said. It's efficient. You give attention to something specific and the result is immediate and concrete. She looked at him. Most people say they cook because it's relaxing. Most people say a lot of things because they're the expected things to say. He thought about this. Fair, she said. He plated the pasta. Without looking at her. Have you eaten? She hadn't. She had been intending to make toast because toast was safe and predictable and her stomach approved of predictable. No, she said. He set a 2nd plate on the counter beside the first. He looked at it. She looked at him. He had already moved to the other side of the counter and was sitting down with his own plate, and he picked up his fork with the air of someone who has done something and is not going to make a ceremony of it, and she understood instinctively that this was how he did things. Quietly, without announcement, and if you drew attention to it, something would close. So she sat down across from him and ate the pasta, which was the best thing she had eaten in at least 2 weeks, and she did not thank him extensively or make it a moment. and they sat in something that was almost companionable silence while November turned into December outside the windows and the city moved through its evening below them. "This is very good," she said after a few minutes. "Yes," he said. "No false modesty. Just a fact." She looked up. He was eating with his eyes on his plate and his left hand flat on the counter in the way she was starting to recognize as a default posture. Grounded, contained. She thought about what Simone had said about him. She thought about the bookshelf with the literary fiction. "What are you reading?" she asked. He looked up. The gray eyes were slightly surprised, as though questions about his reading were unusual, which perhaps they were. "Hilary Mantel," he said. "Wolf Hall." She felt something not very slightly in her. "I love that book." "A beat. You've read it." "Twice." "Cromwell is one of the great characters in English literature." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not exactly, but the almost possibility of one. "Most people find him unlikable." "Most people aren't paying attention," she said. "He's not unlikable. He's competent. In a world that punishes competence if it comes from the wrong place." Callum looked at her for a moment. Something in the look was evaluative. Not unkind, just genuine attention, the kind she was learning he only gave when something had actually earned it. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." They finished the meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than it had been before. Something had changed in its texture. Something had been established. She washed both their plates. He didn't tell her not to or thank her for it. He simply moved back to his study and she made her ginger tea, and Rothko came out of wherever he'd been sleeping and sat on the kitchen counter and watched her with the mild contempt of an animal who has decided the current living arrangement is tolerable. She scratched his ears. "Getting better," she said quietly. Rothko's expression suggested he disagreed, but that he was willing to be persuaded. The first time they had a real argument was on a Thursday in her 4th week over something small. Which is how it usually is, the small thing being the pressure valve for all the large things neither of them had found a way to say. She had come home from school with a headache and had taken paracetamol and lain down, and she had an appointment with Dr. Hughes the next day and she had mentioned it at dinner. They had dinner together 4 times that week, which was happening with more regularity than either of them had planned, and he had said he would rearrange his morning to come. She had looked at him. "You don't have to do that. I'd like to be present for the appointments." "I know, but this is just a routine check. It's not a scan. You don't need to." "I'd like to be there," he said again. His voice was even, but there was something in it. Not a hardness exactly, but a resistance that she recognized as non-negotiable. "Callum." She set down her fork. "I am 27 years old." 26. "I turned 27 last week." Pause. He hadn't known. The small awkwardness of it moved across his face. "I'm 27 years old," she continued, "and I am more than capable of attending my own medical appointments. I've been managing my own healthcare since I was 18. I don't need to be accompanied." "I'm not suggesting you need to be. I'm saying I want to be there. And I'm saying I'd prefer to go alone to the routine ones." He looked at her steadily. "This is my child too. I know that." "Then, Callum." She kept her voice level. She was very good at keeping her voice level. Years of middle school teaching had given her this skill and she found it useful now in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I understand you want to be involved. I respect that. I agreed to that when I agreed to live here. But there is a difference between being involved and monitoring. I need you to trust me to tell you when something important is happening." He was silent for a moment. His jaw was tight in the way she'd learned meant he was processing something he didn't like. "It's not about trust," he said. "Then what is it about?" Another silence. And then something she hadn't expected. A slight, brief, entirely uncharacteristic sign of something that was not composure. A shift in the gray eyes that looked almost like frustration. Not at her. It's something inside himself. "I wasn't there for the beginning," he said. "Any of it." She stilled. "I had planned every part of this. And I wasn't there." He picked up his water glass and put it down again without drinking. "Every appointment from now on is a chance to be present for something." She looked at him across the table. She looked at this man who had built an entire careful structure around the experience of becoming a father and had had it dismantled without his knowledge or consent, and who was sitting in his own kitchen at his own table asking, in the most compressed and guarded way she had ever heard a human being ask for something, to simply be present. She felt the argument leave her body like breath. "Come to the ones where they do the imaging," she said. "The scans. The important milestones. Those, yes. The routine blood pressure checks. I'll go alone and I'll report back immediately." "Deal." He looked at her for a moment. "Deal," he said. It was their second agreement. Like the first one, it hadn't come easily. Like the first one, it held. Chapter 8. What she learned about him. By the time Christmas arrived, she had learned the following things about Callum Hale. He woke at 5:30 without an alarm, which she found either impressive or mildly inhuman and was not sure which. He ran 4 miles every morning regardless of weather. He drank 2 cups of coffee and ate the same breakfast on weekdays: eggs, whole grain toast, half an avocado, with the consistency of someone who had decided that decision fatigue was a real phenomenon and had simply removed breakfast from the category of things requiring a decision. He worked with a focus that was almost physical, a quality of attention so complete that when he was in the study and the door was closed, the apartment felt different. Not quieter but denser somehow, like the air had arranged itself around his concentration. He cooked on Wednesdays. He also, she discovered, cooked on Sunday mornings, producing elaborate breakfasts that he set on the kitchen counter and did not announce, that she and Ruth and occasionally the building's concierge who came up with packages would encounter and consume. He never commented on these meals after making them, as though the act of making them was the entirety of the point. He was reading Wolf Hall when she moved in. He finished it in 10 days and moved on to the second book in the trilogy, and she found him one evening with the book in his hand and an expression on his face that she had come to think of as his reading face, which was different from his working face and his default composed face and was, she thought, the least guarded thing about him. When he was reading, he forgot to be contained. He had a sister named Claire who called on Sundays and whose calls he always answered, even when he was in the middle of other things, which told Nadia something significant about how he prioritized. He did not like small talk. He had the particular social intelligence of a man who can perform warmth when professionally required and does not see the need for it in private. And Nadia, who was herself more interested in genuine conversation than pleasant noise, found this quality startling and then, gradually, clarifying. When Callum said something, it was because he meant it. When he was silent, it was because the alternative was not worth his words. She began to understand this not as coldness but as economy. A very expensive economy, but economy nonetheless. He was completely unrevealing about his past. She knew the broad strokes: Greenwich, Connecticut, Harvard, then Wharton, Hale Capital, built from almost nothing, because these were in every profile she'd read. What she did not know, and what she began to notice was entirely absent from everything he said and did not say, was anything personal. His childhood. His parents. His history with people. These topics didn't come up because he steered conversations with great skill away from them. She let this alone. She had her own things she wasn't ready to put on the table. What she also learned was that he was, despite everything, consistently considerate in the specific ways that matter more than the performative ones. Ruth had been asked, she gathered this, though no one told her directly, to stock whatever Nadia needed. The kitchen was always full of ginger root and the particular brand of sparkling water she liked and the specific crackers that helped with the morning nausea. On days when she was visibly tired when she came home, the apartment was slightly quieter than usual. She couldn't have said exactly how this was achieved, but it was. When the weather turned genuinely cold and she had mentioned, once and in passing, that the walk from the subway was harder than it used to be, his driver began arriving to collect her from Jefferson Prep on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She told him she didn't need the car. "I know," he said. She stopped arguing about it. Christmas Eve was a Friday. She had planned to go to her mother's in Columbus, Ohio, had in fact told her mother about the pregnancy the week before, which had been a conversation of such sustained emotional complexity that she was still processing it. Her mother, Linda Reeves, was a woman of enormous warmth and enormous opinions who did not always know the difference, and who had received the news of Nadia's pregnancy by a stranger's embryo in a hospital error, and the subsequent dissolution of her relationship with Marcus, by saying in the following order, "Oh my baby, that hospital should be burned to the ground. Marcus was never good enough for you and I said that from the start." And then after a long pause, "But you're keeping the baby?" And when Nadia said yes, Linda had said very quietly, "Then we will figure it all out, won't we?" And Nadia had cried for the second time since this whole thing began. But the flight to Columbus was cancelled on December 23rd due to a nor'easter, and rescheduled to the 27th, and Nadia found herself on Christmas Eve, in the apartment on the Upper East Side, alone with Callum and a cat and a view of Central Park that was genuinely extraordinary in the snow. She expected him to be elsewhere. She expected, based on everything she'd understood of him, that he had plans, events, dinners, whatever the social calendar of a man in his position looked like at Christmas. He was in the apartment. She found this out at 11 in the morning when she emerged from her room, and he was in the kitchen making something that smelled like cinnamon and brown butter, and there was snow on the city outside and holiday music playing quietly from somewhere, not the aggressive, omnipresent commercial kind, but something older, something acoustic, and the whole scene was so unexpectedly warm that she stood in the doorway for a moment before he heard her. "Your flight was cancelled," he said without turning around. "Yes. I'll go on the 27th. I know." Ruth mentioned. He was making, she realized as she moved closer, French toast. The elaborate kind with thick bread and vanilla and the cinnamon she'd smelled. "Are you hungry?" She was actually intensely hungry, which had become her new normal. The nausea fading gradually and being replaced by an appetite that was making itself felt very directly. "Yes," she said. She sat at the counter and watched him cook, and the snow came down outside and the music played, and it was, she had to admit it, she admitted it only to herself, filing it away carefully, it was lovely. In a way that made her feel guilty for finding it lovely, because this was not her home and this was not her person, and finding anything about this situation lovely felt like a confusion she couldn't afford. They ate Christmas Eve breakfast at the kitchen counter, side by side, looking out at the park. The park was all white and gray, and the few people visible in it were moving slowly, bundled, their breath making small clouds. "Do you have family?" she asked. It was an impulsive question. The kind of question she kept having with him that she only asked when the silence got comfortable enough that her self-consciousness went offline for a moment. "A sister," he said. "Claire. She's in Portland." He paused. "My parents are in Connecticut. Are you not close?" He considered this the way he considered things. "We have Thanksgiving," he said. "We observe Christmas. It's civil." She looked at him. Civil. What a word to use about one's own family. "Is that enough for you?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's what there is," he said, which was, she was learning, a very Callum Hale distinction. The difference between what is sufficient and what is present, acknowledged without complaint. She thought about her mother. About Linda Reeves, who cried at commercials and called 3 times a week and had driven 6 hours to Columbus to be there when Nadia's cat had been sick, who was excessive and wonderful and sometimes suffocating and entirely unmistakably present. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her. "I didn't say I was unhappy. I know. I'm sorry anyway." He looked at her for another moment, that evaluative look, the one she kept encountering, and then he looked back at the park. "Your mother," he said. "You're close to her?" "Very. Is a lot. But she's, yes, very close." "That's good," he said, and she heard something in the words that was so carefully not wistful that it almost was. After breakfast she washed the dishes and he dried them, the first time they had done this together, standing at the sink in the apartment with the snow still falling, and it was such an ordinary, domestic thing that she became suddenly and intensely aware of him, of the space between them, of how near he was and how far simultaneously. She handed him the last dish and went to her room and sat on the bed and told herself that whatever she was feeling was hormones, which was probably true and definitely insufficient. Outside the snow kept falling. Chapter 9, 6 months. The months accumulated in layers, the way new things always do. The new thing becomes less strange, and then it becomes pattern, and then it becomes, if you're not careful, something you've started to need. Nadia was 14 weeks when she felt the first flicker of movement, so slight she thought she'd imagined it, lying in her bed at 2 in the morning, and then it came again, unmistakable, and she pressed her hand flat against her stomach and lay completely still in the dark and felt something open in her chest so wide she couldn't contain it. She thought about calling her mother. The time difference to Columbus was the same. It was 2 in the morning there too. She thought about texting Simone, but Simone worked early shifts and she didn't want to wake her. She lay in the dark with the feeling and the flicker and the strange, enormous fullness of it, and she didn't call anyone. She just lay there and felt it, and let it be entirely hers for the length of that particular night. She told Callum at breakfast. Not all of it, Not the 2 in the morning part, not the thing it had opened in her. Just the fact. I felt the baby move last night, she said. It's very early for that, but it happened. Dr. Hughes said some women feel it sooner. She watched his face. He was looking at her, and the controlled composure that was his default was doing something she'd seen only a few times, becoming briefly not quite enough to contain what was underneath it. You're sure? He said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He set down his coffee. He looked at the table and then at the window and then at some middle distance where his thoughts apparently lived. Good, he said. Just that. Just good. But his voice was not the voice of a man for whom this was merely good, and she understood by now not to push at the things he kept still, because pushing made them disappear entirely, while leaving them alone sometimes made them surface on their own. The first scan he attended was at 16 weeks. The anatomy scan. The detailed one, the one where the baby became undeniably real in the way that ultrasound images, blurry and strange as they were, had a way of making things undeniably real. They sat side by side in the dim room at Dr. Hughes's practice and watched the screen. And there was the baby, the heartbeat, the spine, the small perfect curl of fingers. Nadia heard Callum stop breathing. She didn't look at him. She looked at the screen. Everything looks excellent, Dr. Hughes said. Perfectly proportioned. Strong heartbeat. Do you want to know the sex? Nadia looked at Callum. He was looking at the screen. He was completely still and his composure was not there. She had never seen him like this, the careful architecture entirely absent, replaced by something unguarded and enormous and nothing at all like cold. Yes, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. A different voice. A girl, Dr. Hughes said. Nadia felt tears arrive before she had any knowledge that she was going to cry. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. She heard beside her a sound that was not quite a breath and not quite anything else. She looked at Callum. He was still staring at the screen. His jaw was tight. His eyes were very bright. He didn't look at her. He looked at the screen for a long time, and then he looked down at his hands on his knees and she could see him with visible effort reassembling himself, bringing the walls back up one by one, because he did not know how to be seen like this and he was frightened of it. She understood suddenly, in the precise and devastating way that people who have been taught not to need anything are frightened of need. But she had seen it. For those 20 or 30 seconds before he rebuilt himself, she had seen Callum Hale look at his daughter for the first time, and she had seen what he was underneath the control and the precision and the extraordinary, exhausting composure. He was someone who loved enormous and was terrified of it. She said nothing. She looked back at the screen. She held on to the image. In the car back to the apartment they were quiet for a long time. A daughter, he said finally. Yes. He looked out the window. I hadn't thought. He stopped. She waited. I hadn't had a preference, he said. I thought it wouldn't matter and it doesn't, but it's different when it's real, she said. He looked at her. Yes. That's allowed, she said. You're allowed to just feel it. He held her gaze for a moment. Something in his eyes that she was learning to recognize as the thing that preceded the door closing. Genuine emotion right at the surface about to be submerged. She's healthy, he said. She's healthy, Nadia agreed. He looked back out the window. That's enough, he said. For today that's enough. And it was enough, and it was also, she thought, watching his profile against the gray winter city, an extraordinary amount. Enough could hold such enormous things, when the person saying it was someone who had taught himself not to ask for more. Part 2, The Stain, Chapter 10, Spring. March arrived the way it always did in New York. Grudgingly, with false starts. A week of genuine warmth followed by a late cold snap that felt like a betrayal and that the city accepted with the pragmatic resignation of people who had been through this before. Nadia was 22 weeks pregnant. She was visibly so now. Her body had made its announcement and was not interested in subtlety. She had stopped being self-conscious about it in the apartment somewhere around week 18, when she realized that Callum observed the progression of her pregnancy with the focused, unsentimental attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, and that this attention contained no judgment and no discomfort. He simply noted it, the way he might note the weather. Factually. As relevant information. She had been at the apartment for 4 months. What had happened in those 4 months? What had been happening slowly, so slowly that she had not noticed it the way you do not notice a tide coming in, was this. They had become, without either of them deciding to, something like companions. Not friends exactly. The word felt insufficient and also slightly wrong, like a shoe on the wrong foot. Not partners. God, not that. She was not letting herself anywhere near that word. But something. Something that had weight and texture and the specificity of two people who have learned each other's rhythms and accommodated them without being asked. She knew that he didn't sleep well on Sundays before a heavy week. She had heard him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning twice on Sunday nights, making chamomile tea, which she found privately remarkable because she never would have predicted chamomile tea for him. She knew that he read the news on his phone for exactly 15 minutes at breakfast and then put it away, and that this discipline was deliberate, and that he believed scrolling news was one of the most efficient ways to corrode your ability to think clearly. She knew that he was extraordinarily capable in a boardroom and marginally less capable with small talk at the school fundraiser she'd invited him to in February. Out of impulsive social generosity, she told him he didn't have to come and he'd come anyway, and he'd been polite and attentive and had stood in the corner of the gymnasium of Jefferson Prep in an overcoat that cost more than the school's audiovisual equipment, with the expression of a man who is doing his genuine best in circumstances where his genuine best was not quite enough, and she had found this unexpectedly endearing. She knew that he liked his coffee hot and his apartment cold and his books serious and his pasta simple and his Sundays quiet. He knew things about her too. She was aware of this in the way you become aware of something you weren't paying attention to. The things he registered without comment that told her he was, in fact, paying close attention. He knew she painted. She had set up a small studio corner in her room with a portable easel and the art supplies she'd moved in with, and she painted on weekend evenings usually, and sometimes he would pass the open door and look in briefly, and she would see the quality of attention on his face and know he was looking at the canvas and not at her. He had asked her once matter-of-factly what she was working on, and she had turned the canvas and he had looked at it. It was a painting of the park from the window, winter bare trees against the gray sky, and he had said simply, "That's good." And she had known he meant it because he did not say things he didn't mean, and she had felt it the way a real compliment feels when it comes from a person who doesn't dispense them for social lubrication. He knew she called her mother on Tuesdays and Fridays. He knew she was struggling in early March with a parent at school. A father who had decided that the art curriculum was soft and said so at a meeting at length, with the particular confidence of a man whose opinions have never been meaningfully challenged. And he had listened to her debrief this over dinner one Wednesday with the quality of attention he gave to actually interesting problems, asking two questions that were so precisely the right questions that they reoriented the whole problem in her mind and made her see the path forward clearly. "You should have been a strategist," she told him. "I am a strategist," he said. "A people strategist." He looked at her. "Are people different?" "Most people think they are." "Most people are wrong," he said, and returned to his dinner, and she laughed. A real laugh, spontaneous, and he looked up at the sound, and for a moment there was something in his expression that was almost. She looked away first. It was Simone who said it. Of course it was Simone. Simone came on Saturday afternoons, usually when Callum was not in the apartment, and she and Nadia would sit in Nadia's room or in the kitchen, and Simone would look around the apartment with the expression of a person who has decided that being impressed by it and being critical of it are actually the same response, and they would drink tea and talk about everything. In March, on a Saturday afternoon, Simone set down her cup and looked at Nadia directly, in the way she had that meant she had decided to say the thing she had been not saying. "You're in love with him," Simone said. Nadia opened her mouth. "Don't," Simone said. "I watched your face for the entire last hour while you told me about the scan and the school event and the dinner last Wednesday. Nadia. I've known you for 9 years." Nadia closed her mouth. "I'm not," she started. "You are. It's complicated. Most things are." She stopped. She looked at the window. The park was beginning to show the first green, very faint. The buds not yet open, but the possibility of them there. "He's not. This isn't something he's looking for. He's told me, not in so many words, but everything about how he is tells me that. He's not built for this." "Did someone build him that way?" Simone asked. Not unkindly. Just, directly. Nadia thought about the Sunday mornings and the chamomile tea. The way his voice had changed when he said she's healthy. "Yes," she said. "I think someone did." Simone was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to tell him?" "Absolutely not." "Nadia." "No." "Simone." He made me a business arrangement, essentially. He was generous about it, and she stopped. It's been more than I expected in a lot of ways. But it's still fundamentally an arrangement. He wanted a surrogate and he got me. Mistake. And I'm not going to make this harder by making feelings his problem too. You're not a mistake, Simone said with the firmness of someone who intends this to land. Nadia looked at her. I know I'm not a mistake, but the situation is. And the feelings I have are mine to manage. Simone looked at her for a long time. I just don't want you to get hurt, she said. I know. You're going to get hurt. Probably, Nadia said. But I'm going to have a daughter too. And that was true. And she had decided worth it. Chapter 11. The night she got sick. It was the second week of April when she woke at 3 a.m. and knew immediately that something was wrong. Not with the baby. Her instincts were very clear about the distinction, and this was about her. A fever, she realized as she took her own temperature in the bathroom with the small digital thermometer she kept in the medicine cabinet. 101.4 degrees. And nausea worse than the pregnancy kind, and a headache that felt like a vice. She considered her options. She could call Dr. Hughes's after-hours line, which she should probably do. She could call Simone, who would come immediately and would have professional and personal opinions. She could lie back down and see if it resolved. She did none of these things at first. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, which was cold and clarifying, and she breathed. She hadn't heard Callum come home. She didn't know if he was in the apartment. It was 3 a.m. and he had had a dinner that she knew was important, and she heard a sound from somewhere in the apartment. The kitchen maybe. He was home. She stood up slowly, wrapped her robe around herself, and opened the bathroom door. The apartment was mostly dark, a lamp on in the hallway. She moved toward the kitchen. He was there. Still in the shirt and trousers he'd worn to dinner. Jacket off, sleeves pushed back, a glass of water in his hand. He looked up when he heard her. You're up, he said, and then, the gray eyes sharpening immediately to something focused. What's wrong? I have a fever, she said. She hadn't planned to tell him. She had no plan at all. She was following the dim logic of not quite well of 3 a.m. 801. I was going to call the after-hours line. He set down the glass. He was already moving. Sit down, he said not unkindly. Do you have chills? A little. Nausea. More than usual. He went to the cabinet, the third one down, which is where she'd seen Ruth stock the medical supplies, and came back with the thermometer and a blanket that appeared from somewhere, one of the soft ones from the hall closet. He put the blanket around her shoulders without comment. He handed her the thermometer. While it registered, how long have you felt like this? I woke up with it. I don't know how long before that. He took his phone out. I'm calling Dr. Hughes's service. It's 3 a.m. That's what an after-hours service is for, he said, and she heard, beneath the steadiness, an urgency that was carefully managed but present. He called. He spoke to whoever answered with the conciseness of a man reporting relevant facts. Her temperature, her symptoms, how far along the pregnancy was. He listened. He thanked them and hung up. She's not alarmed, he said. The fever needs to come down. Tylenol is safe at this stage. Fluids. She wants you to call back if it goes above 102 or if you have any cramping or abdominal pain. Okay. She took the Tylenol he brought her with the water he'd already poured. She was cold and her head ached, and she was sitting at the kitchen counter at 3 a.m. in her robe, and he was standing across from her with his sleeves rolled back and his expression contained but not closed. He was looking at her with an openness he usually only showed when he didn't know he was showing it. Go back to bed, he said. I'll check on you in an hour. You don't need to. Nadia. His voice was even. Patient in the specific way of someone who is not naturally patient and has decided that right now they will be. Go to bed. I'll check in an hour. She went to bed. She lay in the dark with the headache and the blanket and the cold cloth she'd put together herself, and she listened to the apartment settle around her, and at 4:15 there was a soft knock on the door and she said come in, and he opened it just enough to stand in the gap. How are you feeling? Better, she said. Honestly. A little better. He looked at her in the dark for a moment. He hadn't turned on the light. She could see his outline, the set of his shoulders. Good, he said. And then quietly, try to sleep. Callum. He paused in the doorway. She didn't know what she'd been going to say. She lay in the dark and felt the baby move, a nudge, a small certain assertion of presence, and she said, "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment. And then, "Of course," he said, and the way he said it made it sound like there was no other possible world in which he would have done anything else. He closed the door. She pressed her hand to her stomach. He felt the baby move again. "I know," she whispered. "I know." Chapter 12. What he said to Vincent Park. "You need to prepare yourself," Vincent Park said. They were at lunch, the two of them, at a restaurant in Midtown that they'd been going to for 7 years. In a corner booth where Vincent had the prawn linguine and Callum had the same thing he always ordered, and their conversation covered, in its first hour, for matters of real business that required Vincent's attention and which Vincent dispatched with his characteristic dry competence. In the second hour they ordered coffee, and Vincent, who had known Callum for long enough to understand the particular architecture of his silences, said, "How are things at home?" Callum wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Fine," he said. "The arrangements are working?" "The woman." "Nadia," Callum said. There was something in the correction that made Vincent pause. Not agitation. Precision. But precision of a kind that was more careful than strictly necessary. "Nadia," Vincent said. "Things are working with Nadia." "Yes." Pause. "Well. You sound surprised." Callum was quiet for a moment. "She's not." He stopped. "Not what?" "She's not what I expected." Vincent considered this. "What did you expect?" Callum picked up his coffee and put it down without drinking it. A gesture Vincent recognized as the equivalent, in Callum's very restricted gestural vocabulary, of some considerable interior movement. "I expected it to be difficult in practical ways," he said. "Two strangers in the same space. Logistically complex. Emotionally," he paused. "I expected a sustained negotiation. And instead..." "It's not a negotiation," Callum said. He stopped again. He looked at the table. "She's straightforward," he said at last. "She says what she means. She doesn't perform things. A quality you appreciate. In anyone." "Yes." Vincent was quiet for a moment. He had known Callum for 7 years, and he was, beneath the professional persona, a perceptive man who had learned not to make observations that Callum wasn't ready to receive. But he also had the particular privilege of a long-standing attorney. He had seen certain things that Callum showed no one else, and he knew when to press and when to wait. He waited. After a moment Callum said, "She's good with the baby." "She's still pregnant," Vincent observed. "I know. I mean," a pause. "The way she is. With it. She talks to the baby. Not a great deal, but in the evenings sometimes when she doesn't know I can hear." Vincent said nothing. "She painted the nursery color scheme," Callum said. "She didn't ask. She just made a board, one of those." He made a gesture. "Images on card. She left it on the counter and said, 'I was thinking about this for the nursery if you're open to it.' And she had this whole..." A slight thing happened in his voice. "She'd thought about light. The direction the room faced and what the light would be like in the morning. She wanted the baby to wake up in the right kind of light." He stopped. Vincent looked at him carefully. "Callum." "I know," Callum said. "Do you?" "I know what you're going to say." "Then say it yourself." Callum looked at him. The gray eyes, which had over 7 years of professional partnership revealed very little, were doing something different right now. "She's not a surrogate," he said. "She was never. She's a person I live with. Who is going to be in my daughter's life. Who is..." He picked up the coffee and this time drank it. "Set it down." "It's complicated," he said. "The situation is inherently complicated." "Is it the situation that's complicated?" Silence. "You need to prepare yourself," Vincent said again gently. "That's all I'm saying. You need to think carefully about what's happening in that apartment and where it leads, because a child is going to be born in..." He checked his calendar. 14 weeks. "And after the birth, the original plan was for you to establish a household and she would..." "I know what the plan was." "Is it still the plan?" Callum didn't answer. Vincent let the silence sit. He drank his coffee. Outside the restaurant, the April city moved in its perpetual motion, cars and pedestrians and the particular energy of a Tuesday lunchtime in Midtown. "You should prepare yourself," Vincent said again for the third time, meaning something slightly different each time. Callum said nothing. But he didn't say yes, it's still the plan either. Chapter 13, April into May. She was teaching a unit on self-portraiture when the first thing happened. The thing she filed under nothing told herself was nothing, and that was clearly something. She was standing at the front of her classroom, the afternoon light coming in sideways through the windows. Her 7th graders bent over their canvases with the particular concentrated frowning energy of 12-year-olds who had decided to take something seriously. And she was talking about Frida Kahlo, about how a self-portrait is not a mirror but an interpretation, when her phone on silent in her pocket buzzed once. A message from Callum, which was in itself not unusual. They texted practically about logistics, about appointments, about Ruth's grocery lists, but the text said, "I'm going to be late tonight. Don't wait on dinner," which she never did formally, but which he knew she often delayed if she didn't know what time he'd be home, because they ate together more often than not these days and they hadn't talked about this or decided it. It had simply become the structure of their evenings. She typed back, "I'll leave something in the oven." Pause. "Then you don't have to do that." She stared at her phone. Then she typed, "I know," and put it back in her pocket. She left soup in the oven. She was in bed by 10 reading, when she heard him come in at 11:30. She heard the kitchen sounds, cabinet opening, quiet footsteps. Then silence. Then very softly the particular sound of a spoon against a bowl. She looked at the ceiling. She felt the baby, who was now a definite, undeniable physical presence, an active, emphatic presence, move once firmly. Like punctuation. "I know," she told her very quietly to the ceiling. The second thing happened on a Saturday in the first week of May, on an afternoon when she had been painting and Callum had been in the study, and she had stopped to make tea and he had emerged from the study at the same time, and they had been in the kitchen together in the particular companionable way of two people whose shared space had become, without discussion, shared. She had poured him tea without asking. She knew he would take it. He switched to tea in the afternoons, green, which she found consistently charming in a man who otherwise projected such relentless executive productivity. He took the cup without comment. She had her feet curled under her on the couch. She discovered that the big couch by the window was the most comfortable thing she'd ever sat on in her life, and that she could fall asleep on it in under 7 minutes, which was a new skill she'd developed alongside pregnancy. And she was looking at the park, which was green now, genuinely green, the trees fully out, the reservoir glinting in the afternoon light. He sat on the other end of the couch. He picked up his book. They sat like that for 2 hours. Reading. The window. The park. She fell asleep somewhere in the second hour, which was becoming predictable, and when she woke up it was late afternoon and the light had changed, golden and angled, and there was a blanket over her that had not been there when she fell asleep. Callum was still at the other end of the couch. Still reading. He didn't look up when she stirred. But he said, "You were cold." She looked at the blanket. She said nothing. She tucked it more carefully around herself and looked back at the park. And something in her chest was so large and so unmanageable that she had to breathe carefully for a moment until it became manageable again. The third thing, the thing she could not file away, could not call nothing, could not manage into smallness no matter how hard she tried, happened in the second week of May. She was 30 weeks pregnant. She was, according to Dr. Hughes, doing extraordinarily well. The baby was doing extraordinarily well. Everything was medically textbook. Emotionally, nothing was textbook. She had been painting for 2 hours and had stopped and cleaned up and changed and was in the kitchen when Callum came home. He was later than usual, 9 o'clock, and he came in still in his coat, and something about the way he moved when he came in told her immediately that the day had been difficult. She'd learned to read this. It was a quality of stillness he brought when something had been challenging, a tighter version of his ordinary control, like a structure under pressure. She said nothing. She had learned that the worst thing you could do when he needed silence was fill it. She made food. She made the pasta she'd learned to make because she'd watched him make it so many times. The simple version, the one with olive oil and garlic and a great deal of Parmesan. And she set a bowl in front of him and sat across with her own and ate. After a while he said, "I lost the Nashville project." She looked up. The financing fell through. 14 months of work. He said it without apparent affect, the same way he said most things that she had learned to read, not for what they contained but for what they didn't. "It happens." "Does it happen often?" "No." A brief pause. "Not with this much investment." She looked at him. He was eating, looking at the bowl, his jaw tight in the way she knew. I'm sorry, she said. He shook his head slightly, not dismissively, but the way you shake your head at something that is simply true and doesn't require condolence. It's business. It's still a loss, she said. He looked up at that. The gray eyes and something in them that was the particular vulnerability of a person being accurately seen. Yes, he said. It is. She held his gaze. She didn't say anything else. She had learned that with him words were for information and silence was sometimes for something else. For the things that words weren't the right container for. After a moment he looked down at his food. After a moment more he said quietly, "Thank you for the pasta." "You're welcome," she said. She cleared the table afterward. He helped the way he always did now, and their hands passed things back and forth in the kitchen in the practiced way of two people who have learned each other's rhythms without deciding to. And at one point she reached for the pot at the same time he did, and their hands landed on the handle at the same time and they both stilled. A breath. 2 seconds. He moved his hand. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine," she said. He put the pot away. She did not look at him. She could feel him behind her, close in the small geography of the kitchen, and her heart was doing something completely undignified that she had absolutely no control over. "Good night," she said and left the kitchen. She went to her room. She sat on the bed. She put both hands over her face. The baby moved. An emphatic, opinionated movement, the kind she'd started to think of as the baby registering its views on the proceedings. "I know," Nadia said to her hands. I know. I know. She didn't know anything. That was the problem. She knew exactly what she felt and she knew exactly how impossible it was and she knew exactly what was coming. The birth and the co-parenting arrangement and the careful, contracted future in which she and Callum Hale would be the parents of a child and nothing more. And she knew that she was, despite all of this knowing, deeply, entirely, dangerously in love with a man who had told the world and himself, and her by implication, that love was not something he was built for. She lay down on her side the way she slept now with the pillow for support and she looked at the city through the window and she let herself feel all of it, the full enormous weight of it. Because she had decided that it was important to feel things fully rather than running from them even when, especially when, they were this large and this complicated. He felt it fully. Then she breathed. Then she slept. Chapter 14. What he did not say. The thing about Callum was this: he noticed. He noticed everything and he said very little, and these two facts, existing in the same person, produced a specific kind of internal pressure that he had been managing his entire adult life, and that was, in the months of May and June, becoming harder to manage. He noticed when she started a new painting, a shift in the quality of her evenings, a slightly absent look that meant something was taking shape in her mind. He noticed the way she talked to the baby, which he had mentioned to Vincent and had not mentioned to anyone else, because it was private, it was hers, and mentioning it would make it into something observed rather than something simply true. He noticed the way she laughed. He had learned there were different kinds, the polite professional one and the real one that was louder and more sudden and that he found every single time disproportionately compelling. He noticed when she was tired. He noticed when she was sad. He noticed, with particular and uncomfortable clarity, the exact moment in the kitchen in May when they had both reached for the same pot and he had felt the awareness of her proximity as something that was not merely spatial. He moved his hand. He was not an impulsive man. He did not act on feelings he hadn't fully examined, and he was still in the process of fully examining this one, which was taking longer than he would like because every time he got close to it and looked at it directly it became very large and he found he had to step back and take a different angle. He had loved before. He was reasonably certain of this, looking back at his 20s with the perspective of someone who has learned more about himself since. He had loved in the way of someone who doesn't quite know how to do it. Adequately, sincerely, but incompletely, always holding back the last room, always keeping that door shut. He had thought, after the last relationship ended and the woman, whose name was Diana and who was extraordinary, had said, "I can't keep living outside your last 10%, that perhaps this was simply who he was. That the last 10% was locked and the key had been lost a long time ago. He was becoming less sure of this. Because the thing was, and he was looking at it now in the early mornings when he ran through the park and his mind had no business to occupy it, looking at it with the same directness he applied to everything. The thing was that he was different in this apartment than he had ever been anywhere else. He was not performing anything. He was not managing his presentation. He made pasta on Wednesdays and brought blankets when she fell asleep and stood in her doorway at 4 in the morning because he could not have not stood there. He didn't know what to do with this. He knew what he didn't want to do. He didn't want to make her a problem to be managed. He didn't want to take what was working, what was genuinely, improbably working better than anything he had planned, and break it by saying something he couldn't unsay. But he was also aware, with the specifically unpleasant awareness of a man who has spent his life being precisely self-honest, that he was not being honest about this, and that dishonesty had a way of accumulating costs. He talked to Claire. Not fully. With Claire he was more open than with anyone, but there were still things he kept back, layers of the thing he was not ready to expose to another person's examination. He told her the pregnancy was going well. He told her Nadia was interesting, he said, and Claire said interesting in the way of a person for whom this word is a significant understatement. Tell me about her, Claire said. She teaches art to middle school students, he said. That's what she does. Tell me about her. He was quiet for a moment. She's honest, he said. She doesn't qualify things. She says what she means. You like that? I respect it. Those aren't the same thing. I know. Callum. Claire. Are you? She stopped. He could hear her choosing her approach. Are you happy? She asked finally. Like actually happy? In that apartment. He thought about it. He thought about Wednesday dinners and the park from the window and the way the apartment had felt different for months now, with a different quality of occupancy than it had ever had before. Yes, he said. It came out simpler and more certain than he expected. Oh, Claire said very softly. Don't, he said. I'm not doing anything. You're doing the voice. What voice? The voice you get when you think something is happening that you're going to be right about. Pause. I love you, she said. I know. Be careful with her, Callum. I'm always careful. That's what worries me, she said. Chapter 15, 34 weeks. The nursery was painted at 32 weeks. Nadia had chosen the color. A soft warm cream for the walls, with one deeper accent wall in a dusty sage green that caught the morning light perfectly, which she had known it would because she had spent 2 weeks thinking about light in that room, and she was not wrong. She and Ruth had overseen the painters on a Tuesday, and when they left she had stood in the doorway of the finished room and felt something she could only describe as rightness, the particular satisfaction of a space that has been thoughtfully made. Callum came to look that evening. He stood beside her in the doorway and looked at the room, the color, the crib that had been assembled the week before, the small dresser with the wooden mobile Ruth had ordered, the soft rug on the floor that was warm cream to match the walls. This is exactly right, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the crib. I thought about the light in the mornings, she said. I know. You said. He was still looking at the crib. Something in his face was very quiet. She's going to wake up in this room, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. What do you think she'll be like? He asked. It was, she realized, the first time he had asked her anything like this. A question about the baby that was not practical, not medical, but speculative, imaginative. Human. He thought about it. I think she'll have opinions, she said. Strong ones. Early. The corner of his mouth moved. Why? Because she's already... Nadia put a hand on her stomach. She has things to say in there. She lets me know when she's unhappy about something. She's emphatic. Like you, he said. She looked at him. He was still looking at the crib, but there was something in his tone that was different. Not careful, not managed, but simply present. Maybe, she said. He turned to look at her then. For a moment they were just standing in the doorway of the nursery, close in the way that the narrow doorway required, and the light was the late evening amber of a June night, and his eyes were gray and direct, and she was 32 weeks pregnant, and she looked away. Good night, she said. Same word she always used. Same exit. She went to her room. She sat on the bed. She heard him in the hallway, then the nursery again, and she thought about him standing there alone in the room they had made together for the daughter neither of them had planned, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. Don't, she told herself. Don't. She was 34 weeks when he said the thing he shouldn't have said. She came back from school on a Thursday to find 2 women she didn't know in the living room. Both in their 30s, both elegant, both looking at her with the particular alert assessment of people who have been told to expect you and are deciding what they think. Callum was in the room too. He stood up when she came in, and she could see immediately, from the quality of the room, from something in his posture, that he had not expected her back yet. Nadia. A brief pause. This is Margot and Sophie. Business associates. She smiled at the women. They smiled back. She went to her room. She did not know why this bothered her. She could not have articulated it exactly. It was not jealousy, or it was not only jealousy because she was not willing to own jealousy yet, was not ready for what owning it meant. It was something else. Something about the particular way the room had been arranged, the way he had stood up when she came in with the quality of someone who is managing two worlds that have unexpectedly collided. Something about being in this apartment for 6 months and knowing every corner of it and still encountering a door that showed her the version of his life she was not part of. Business associates. Of course. That was his life. He was not his life. She sat at her desk and tried to grade the projects she'd brought home, her 7th grader self-portraits, which were actually quite extraordinary this year, raw and particular and alive in the way real work is alive, and she could not concentrate. She could hear voices in the other room. Occasional laughter, a woman's laugh. The particular low register of his voice when he was performing affability. She graded 2 projects. She set down her pen. She heard the women leave at 8. She heard the apartment become quiet. She stayed in her room. At 8:30 Callum knocked. He said, "Come in." He opened the door. He stood in the frame. She was beginning to think of the door frame as his natural habitat, the place he stationed himself when he was being careful. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I'm not hungry." Pause. He knew she was lying. They had lived in the same space for 6 months and he knew when she was lying about hunger and he knew right now she was lying about hunger. "The meeting ran long," he said. "I would have told you." "You don't have to tell me anything," she said. "This is your apartment. I don't expect to know your schedule." He was quiet for a moment. "You're upset," he said. "I'm fine." "Nadia." "Callum." She turned to face him. She was very calm on the surface. She had years of practice at this, years of being the person in the room who remained steady. "I'm fine. I was just tired after school." "Please don't, I'm fine." He looked at her for a long moment. And then he said the thing. "You know this isn't permanent," he said. His voice was even. Careful. The way it was when he was trying to be honest and wasn't certain how the honesty would land. "After the baby, the arrangement changes. We've both known that from the beginning." The room was very quiet. She looked at him. She held his gaze and she kept her face exactly where she wanted it. Still, composed, not revealing the thing that had just happened inside her when those words hit. "I know that," she said. "I just want to make sure we're both." "Callum." Firmly. "I know. I have always known. You don't need to remind me." He looked at her and she saw it in the gray eyes, something that was not what he had intended to show. Something that was, she couldn't quite read it. Not relief. Not quite. Something more complicated and less certain. He said. He stopped. "I'll leave something in the kitchen." "Thank you," she said. He left. She turned back to her desk. She picked up her pen. She set it down. She pressed her hand to her mouth and breathed through her nose for a count of 10, and then she picked up the pen again and she graded the rest of the self-portraits. Because there were 23 12-year-olds who had put something real and brave onto canvas and they deserved her full attention, and she was not going to give the next hour to a feeling. He would give it to them. She would feel the rest later when she was alone. She was very practiced at this. Part 3, The Breaking Chapter 16. July. Summer arrived and made the apartment luminous. The light through the big windows was different in July, warmer and more direct, filling the rooms in a way that winter had not. And Nadia moved through it with the particular physical reality of a woman who is 37 weeks pregnant in a New York July, which is to say, she moved slowly and she was warm and she was enormous, and she was tired in a way that was beyond ordinary tiredness into something structural, as though her bones were tired. She had stopped teaching at the end of June. 35 weeks, Dr. Hughes had said, was a reasonable endpoint, and Nadia had agreed, which meant she had been in the apartment full-time for the last 2 weeks. Which was a different kind of sharing of space than before. Before there had been the structure of her days at school, the getting up and going, the professional world, the children, the corridor of competence and purpose that she walked through every weekday and that organized her sense of herself. Without it she was just here. In this apartment. All day. With Rothko, who had never had opinions about the quality of her company before and now seemed to find her constant presence slightly excessive. Callum worked from home 3 days a week during July, which was unusual. She gathered from the occasional fragments of conversation she overheard that there was a major acquisition being finalized and he wanted to be accessible without being tied to the office. The study door was closed from 8 to 6. The apartment held its breath around his concentration. In the evenings they ate together. She had stopped cooking, a concession to physics. Standing at the stove was genuinely uncomfortable, and Callum had, without discussion, simply taken over. He cooked every evening now, not just Wednesdays, and he cooked the way he did everything, with focused competence and without ceremony, and she sat at the counter and watched, and they talked or didn't talk in the easy way of two people whose shared silence had become as comfortable as conversation. She had stopped trying to manage what she felt. She was 37 weeks pregnant and exhausted, and she simply did not have the energy for it anymore. He felt it. He let it be what it was. She kept it very carefully away from him because she had no intention of making it his problem, but within herself she had stopped pretending. He loved him. She was in love with him. It was the quiet, thorough, bone-deep kind of love that has had months to establish itself, that has grown in the small daily increments of shared life. The meals, the silences, the mornings, the way he dried the dishes, the way he said goodnight, the way he had stood in her doorway at 4 a.m. and said try to sleep, as though there was no other possible response to her having a fever. She loved him, and she was going to have his daughter, and after the birth she was going to negotiate the co-parenting arrangement they had both known was coming, and she was going to move out of this apartment back into the world, and she was going to be fine. This was the plan. She held it like a railing. The night of July 14th was hot and airless. The city in the grip of the kind of heat that makes everything feel slightly unreal, the streets shimmering, the air thick. Nadia had been restless all day with a low, persistent backache that she'd been attributing to position, to the heat, to the general physical inconvenience of being this pregnant in this weather. At 11:15 at night she understood it wasn't position. She sat up in bed and timed the contractions for 30 minutes with the calm efficiency of a woman who had, over the past months, read more about labor than she had ever intended to know about any subject, and when they were consistent in 7 minutes apart she got up, dressed, and went to knock on Callum's door. He answered immediately, which told her he hadn't been fully asleep. "It's time," she said. He looked at her for a second. Just 1 second. And then he was entirely in motion. Phone, bag, keys, coat, moving with the same focused economy she knew from his professional life, directed now at this. "How far apart?" he asked. 7 minutes. "They started about an hour ago. I waited to be sure." "You waited an hour," he said. "I wanted to be certain." He looked at her, a flash of something, not anger but its cousin. "Next time you come to me immediately. There won't be a next." "Nadia." "Okay," she said. "Okay." He called the hospital from the car. He sat beside her in the back seat, and she had a contraction that was considerably less gentle than the previous ones, and she breathed through it with her eyes closed and her hand on the seat between them, and she felt his hand cover hers. Just briefly. Just for the length of the contraction. She opened her eyes when it passed. He was looking ahead, already on the phone with Dr. Hughes's answering service. She looked at her hand. She looked at the city going by outside. She held it together. Zara Hale was born at 4:57 in the morning on July the 15th, after 11 hours of labor, in a delivery room at New York Presbyterian, where Dr. Hughes was extraordinary and the nurses were competent, and the light in the early morning was gray and soft through the window. She was 7 pounds 2 ounces. She was perfect. She had a full head of dark hair and the slightly shocked expression of an entity that has recently been introduced to the concept of the outside world and is forming opinions. Nadia held her first. She held her and felt all the things that happen in that moment. The things that language does not quite contain, that every person who has ever held a newborn has tried to articulate, and that resist articulation the way water resists being held in open hands. She looked at Zara and she recognized her. That was the only word. She simply knew her. Callum was beside her. She looked up at him. He was looking at the baby with the expression she had seen for 20 seconds at the anatomy scan. The unguarded, enormous, unmanaged thing. Except now it was not 20 seconds and he did not pull it back, because perhaps there are things you can't pull back even when you've spent your whole life learning how. "Do you want to hold her?" Nadia asked. He looked at her. His eyes were, she had never seen him look like this. Not in 7 months of living in the same apartment, not in hundreds of conversations, not in any of the moments she had collected and filed away. He looked like a man who has been waiting for something without knowing what, and has just found it standing right in front of him. Yes, he said. She placed Zara in his arms. She watched him take her with the careful, slightly terrified precision of someone who has never held a newborn and is aware of how new and how small this person is. She watched him settle the baby against his chest. She watched him look down at her. He said nothing. He just held her. Nadia looked away out the window at the pale gray of the early morning, and she pressed her lips together and breathed very slowly and let him have this moment entirely to himself, because it was his and it was private and it was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. Chapter 17. August. The house. They stayed at the hospital for 2 days. On the third day they came home, the three of them, in Callum's car with Zara in the car seat that had been installed and inspected twice, and Nadia in the back seat beside the baby, exhausted and sore and suffused with the specific altered consciousness of new parenthood. The apartment was ready. Ruth had prepared it with thoroughness and grace. The nursery, everything in its place, the kitchen stocked with easy foods, Nadia's room fresh made with extra pillows. There were flowers on the kitchen counter that Nadia did not ask about and attributed to Ruth, though she was not entirely sure. The first night, the baby slept in the bassinet in Nadia's room as planned. Nadia woke every 2 hours to feed her. By 4 in the morning she was sitting in the armchair in the nursery, because the bassinet had been moved to the nursery for the feeding chair. And she was so tired she was slightly outside herself, that particular postpartum exhaustion that is beyond exhaustion into something almost transcendental. Callum appeared in the nursery doorway at 4:15. He was in pajamas. She had never seen him in pajamas before, had never considered this aspect of him, and the ordinariness of it undid her slightly. He looked at the baby who was asleep and at Nadia who was barely so. "Go to bed," he said. "I'll take her." "You don't." "I know how to hold a baby," he said. "I've been practicing." He said it without any humor, but it was not without warmth. "Go to bed, Nadia." She went to bed. She slept for 4 uninterrupted hours, which was the most she had slept in 3 days, and when she woke and came to the nursery, Callum was in the feeding chair with Zara on his chest, both of them asleep. His head was back against the chair. His arms around the baby were careful even in sleep. She stood in the doorway and looked at them for a long moment. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window and watched the city wake up. And she did not think about the co-parenting agreement or the future or the arrangement or any of it. She just drank her coffee and let the morning be what it was. August was the month they stopped pretending there were rules. Not formally. Not with any conversation or declaration. But the structure they had established, the careful separation, the managed proximity, the sustained performance of 2 people who are coexisting and nothing more, fell away in the daily reality of a newborn, because a newborn does not respect careful structure and does not care about the architecture of adult pretense. They passed Zara back and forth. They ate at hours that made no logical sense. They sat together in the nursery at 2 in the morning, sometimes both of them, because the baby was awake and crying, and it turned out that 2 adults were better than one at managing a baby who had decided that the night was the appropriate time for opinions. They fell asleep on the couch together. Twice, 3 times, Nadia waking to find herself asleep against the arm of the couch with Callum at the other end, or once with her head on his shoulder, which she woke from to find he was not moving, not adjusting, just still. And she was too tired to do anything about it, so she simply went back to sleep. She was not thinking about the future. She was in the present tense, which was the only tense that had any room in it right now. But the future was coming. Chapter 18. What broke first? It started with a phone call he didn't expect her to hear. She was in the nursery with Zara, the door slightly open, and she could hear him in the hallway outside his study. She was not eavesdropping, she was feeding the baby, and the voices carried, and she would have had to actively work to not hear. He was talking to someone. James Okafor, she thought from the context. The attorney. "Yes," Callum said. "The plan still stands. Post-birth, we formalize the co-parenting agreement. She'll want to establish her own residence. I'll support that. Financially, completely. But the arrangement as it stands isn't." A pause while the other person spoke. "It's not what was intended," Callum said. "From the beginning, this was meant to be a temporary arrangement. We've both understood that." Nadia sat very still. She looked at Zara, who was nursing with single-minded focus and beautiful indifference to the adult world. She looked at the room, the sage green wall, the light she had thought about, the room she had made for this baby with the care of someone who had expected to be present in it. She'll want to establish her own residence. As though he knew what she would want. As though the ending of this was something he was actively managing, planning, tidying into the existing structure of his ordered life. It's not what was intended. She was not what was intended. He had always known this. She had been telling herself she knew this. But there is a difference between knowing a thing in your mind and hearing it confirmed through a slightly open door while you are feeding the baby you both love in the nursery you made together. And that difference is the distance between knowing and feeling. He felt it fully. She did not say anything that night. Or the next day. She moved through the days with the careful normality she had become very good at. She had been practicing since November, since the first week in this apartment when she had established the discipline of keeping her feelings below the visible line. But something had cracked. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a hairline fracture. Not the pain yet, but the instability. The knowledge that the structure has changed. Then came the night when she made the mistake of hoping. They were in the kitchen late, 9 o'clock, Zara finally asleep after an evening of unusual fussiness, both of them at the counter with wine for him and sparkling water for her. And the particular relief of a baby who has stopped crying was making everything feel slightly softer and warmer than it was. He was tired. She could see it. The controlled composure slightly looser than usual, his eyes less guarded. This happened sometimes late in the evenings when the day had been long. It was one of her favorite versions of him, though she would never say so. They were talking about nothing in particular. Something she'd read, something he'd heard, the low-stakes conversation of two tired people who are comfortable with each other. And he refilled his wine and looked at her across the counter and said, "What do you want?" After. When things settle. She thought it was a practical question. She answered practically. She wanted to go back to teaching. She had been in contact with Jefferson Prep and they were holding her position. She wanted to paint more seriously. She had been thinking about applying for a residency. "No," he said. Quietly. He paused. He looked at his wine glass. He was choosing words with unusual care, which she was starting to notice. "What do you want? For yourself? In your life?" She looked at him. The kitchen was warm, Zara was asleep, the city was outside doing what it always did. His eyes were on hers and they were open in the way they only were when he was tired enough that the management lapsed. She understood suddenly that she was standing on the edge of something. He made the mistake. "I want what I have," she said. Quietly. Honestly. It was the truest answer she had. She gestured slightly, at the kitchen, at the apartment, at everything around them. "This. I want." She stopped. She looked at him. She held his gaze and she saw it. The thing that moved in his eyes when she said this. Not the door closing. Something else. Something that leaned toward her and then, in the space of a breath, retreated. "Nadia," he said. She heard it in her name. She heard the prefix to a sentence she did not want to hear. "Don't," she said. Quickly. "You don't have to." "I'm not built for this," he said. The words were not loud. They were very quiet. They were, she realized, the most honest thing he had said to her in 7 months, or the most honest thing he had said that was designed to hurt. And she did not think he intended to hurt her. She knew he didn't intend it, but she also knew that the words came from a place of protection, his own protection, and that they were landing in her like something physical. "I know," she said. He looked frustrated. With himself, she thought, not with her. "I'm not what you would want. Long term. I'm not the kind of person who—" "Callum." She heard her own voice, very steady, and she was grateful for it in the way she was grateful for stable ground. "I heard you. The phone call. A few days ago. With James Okafor." He stilled. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I haven't asked you for anything. I made a statement and you responded and I understand the response. We don't need to have a conversation about it." "Nadia." "Good night," she said. She left the kitchen. She went to her room. She did not cry this time. She was too far past crying, had come to a place on the other side of crying where things simply settled into shape, clear and cold as winter water. She sat on the bed. She looked at the city. She'll want to establish her own residence. She would. He was going to. She lay down in the dark and she thought about Zara, sleeping in the nursery. About how she had felt holding her for the first time. About how she had felt watching Callum hold her. About how the three of them had been, in the weeks since Zara's birth, something that felt so close to a real thing that she had made the mistake of believing it was one. She had not been intended to be here. She knew that. The universe had made a mistake, and the mistake had given her the greatest love of her life. Her daughter, this child she had not planned for and would not give up for anything. And it had also, in the same motion, given her a love she could not have and that was going to hurt her for a very long time. She breathed. She thought. She began very quietly in the dark to make a plan. Chapter 19. The Letter. It took her 2 weeks to be ready. 2 weeks during which she was entirely herself. Warm with the baby, civil and steady with Callum, going through the motions of their shared life with the painful grace of a woman who is saying a long private goodbye to something she loves. She did not let him see it. She had become, over 7 months, very skilled at keeping things beneath the visible line, and she used this skill now with everything she had. She found an apartment. It was in Brooklyn, Park Slope, a 2-bedroom, the second bedroom small but perfect for a nursery with good light and a park nearby and a building that allowed cats. It was not as nice as the Upper East Side apartment. It was 1,000 times more hers. She called her mother. Her mother did not say "I told you so," which was one of the things Nadia loved most about her. Linda Reeves knew that some moments called for wisdom and some called simply for presence, and she offered the latter without the former. He called Simone. Simone said, "Tell me what you need." "Help moving," Nadia said. Pause. "Okay," Simone said. "Then, are you sure?" "I'm sure." "And Zara?" "I talked to Deborah. The co-parenting agreement. We should have had it finalized already, honestly. We'll formalize it. He'll have equal time. I'm not trying to keep her from him. That was never what any of this was about." "Are you sure?" Simone said again. "About moving?" "About all of it." Nadia thought about the kitchen conversation. About his voice saying "I'm not built for this." About the phone call. About 7 months of learning this man and being, in return, seen by him in a way that no one had ever seen her before, and having that seeing be so perfectly insufficient because what she needed was not to be seen but to be chosen, and those were not the same thing. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." She packed quietly over 3 days while he was at the office. She was methodical about it. She had come in with her things in boxes and she would leave the same way. She packed her paintings last, wrapping each one carefully. She packed Rothko's things. She packed Zara's things with the care of a woman packing the most important cargo she has ever been responsible for. She arranged the move for a Thursday when she knew he had a board meeting that would keep him at the office until at least 7. On Wednesday night she wrote the letter. She wrote it by hand because she had never been able to say important things in typing. There was something about the act of the hand on the page that made honesty more possible, that removed the distance of the screen. She sat at the small desk in her room with Rothko in his carrier and Zara asleep in the bassinet and the city outside the window for the last night, and she wrote. She wrote for a long time. He crossed things out. She started again. When she was done, this is what the letter said. "Calm. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty. I want to be clear about that from the beginning because I know you, and I know that your first instinct will be to translate this into a problem you've created that you now need to manage. That's not what this is. This is just me being honest with you, which I think I owe you and which I think you'll find easier to receive in a letter than in person, because you are a man who processes things better when no one is watching. I need you to know some things before I say the practical parts. I need you to know that these 7 months have been, I don't have the right word. Extraordinary seems too grand and too distant both. They have been the most unexpectedly real months of my life. I came here as a stranger, as a mistake, as an inconvenient consequence of something that wasn't supposed to happen, and you made room for me. Not easily, not without conflict, but genuinely. You made room for me in a way that I did not expect and that I will be grateful for the rest of my life. I need you to know that I see you. I mean this specifically, not the version of you that you present to the world, not Callum Hale of Hale Capital Partners, the formidable and controlled and impressive man. I mean the version of you who makes chamomile tea at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep. Who cooked on Wednesdays because a long day in business school needed a small reliable comfort. Who stood in a doorway at 4 in the morning to check on a woman who was sick. Who brought a blanket without being asked. Who said, "Try to sleep," as though there was only one possible world in which he would do this. That person. I see him. I love him. I am writing the word because I think you should have it in your hands, even if it complicates things, even if it's inconvenient. I love you. I have loved you for a long time. I'm not telling you this to ask you for anything. I tried that once or something close to it, and you told me very clearly that you're not built for this, and I heard you, and I am not going to ask you to be something you've decided you're not. But I need to tell you because keeping it felt like a small ongoing dishonesty, and I have tried very hard to be honest with you. Here are the practical things. I have found an apartment in Brooklyn. It has good light. Zara's room has a window that faces east. I've spoken to Deborah about the co-parenting agreement. My position has not changed. I want you to be fully and meaningfully present in her life. I will be flexible. I will be fair. She loves you already. I can see it in the way she settles when you hold her, and I am not going to take that from either of you. I need you to understand why I'm leaving, and it's not because I'm angry. I'm not angry. I'm leaving because I cannot spend the rest of my life in a state of wanting something that is not offered, in close proximity to the person who is not offering it. That is not good for me, and it is not good for Zara, and I think if you're honest with yourself, you know it is not good for you either. You deserve a full life, Callum. Not a contained one. I know you believe that what you have is enough. That the control and the order and the walls are a choice and not a loss. Maybe that's true. But I watched you hold your daughter for the first time, and I know what you are capable of feeling, and I am not willing to stand beside you and watch you choose not to feel it. That's not a condemnation. It's a love letter to the version of you that I hope will exist someday. Zara and I will be at the Brooklyn address below as of Thursday. Please have James Okafor contact Deborah regarding the formal agreement. I'm sorry I couldn't say this to your face. Think you know why. You are the most interesting, frustrating, extraordinary person I have ever known. She is going to love you so much, and you are going to be a wonderful father, and I will make sure she knows that. Take care of yourself, Nadia. She left it on the kitchen counter, under the coffee machine where she knew he would see it first thing. She left at 6 in the morning before he was awake. She carried Zara in her car seat, Rothko in his carrier, and she did not look back at the apartment building when she got into the car. She looked forward. She looked at the street in front of her, the city waking up, the particular early morning light of a New York summer that was golden and long and forgiving. She did not cry until the car crossed the bridge. Then she cried. She cried for a long time, which she was entitled to, which she had earned, and which was also, she knew this, not the end of anything. Just the place where one thing stops and another has to begin. Chapter 20. The letter breaks him. He found it at 5:32 in the morning. He had woken at the usual time, run the usual 4 miles, come back to find the apartment with the particular quality of silence that is different from ordinary quiet. The silence of a space that has been vacated, that has had something removed from it that was part of its structure. He stood in the kitchen. The letter was under the coffee machine. He picked it up. He read it standing at the counter in his running clothes, still breathing slightly hard from the run, with the early morning light beginning to come through the big windows. He read it once. Then he stood very still for a long time. He read it again. I see you. I mean this specifically. That person. I see him. I love him. You are the most interesting, frustrating, extraordinary person I have ever known. He set the letter down. He pressed both palms flat on the counter. He looked at his hands. He had spent his entire adult life in a state of managed isolation. Not by accident, not by tragedy, but by choice, by the long accumulated decisions of a man who had decided that connection was a liability and that he was better at things than at people, and that this was fine, that this was enough. He had made this choice so thoroughly and for so long that he had stopped being able to distinguish between what he'd chosen and what he was. The last 10%. The locked room. He had thought he was protecting himself. He had thought he was being realistic. He looked at the letter. He looked at the words "I love you" in her handwriting, which he recognized now the way you recognize a sound you've been hearing for a long time without ever specifically attending to it. I cannot spend the rest of my life in a state of wanting something that is not offered, in close proximity to the person who is not offering it. He understood, reading this, with the specific and devastating clarity that sometimes comes all at once after a long period of not understanding, that she was right. That he had been doing this, exactly this, to her. That he had known on some level and had chosen not to look at what he knew, because looking at it would have required him to do something about it, and doing something about it was the thing he did not know how to do. I watched you hold your daughter for the first time, and I know what you are capable of feeling. He picked up the letter again. He read the line about Zara settling when he held her. He went to the nursery. The bassinet was still there. The room was exactly as they had made it. The sage walls, the morning light, the small dresser. But the small things that had been Zara's, the receiving blankets, the soft stuffed animals, the particular small arrangement of personhood that a baby generates around itself, they were gone. He stood in the empty nursery for a very long time. He was not, he had always believed, a person who could be broken open. He had too much architecture for that, too many carefully constructed walls. He was a man who processed loss as information and moved forward. He had always been this man. He stood in the nursery and he felt for the first time in his adult life the full weight of what he had been protecting himself from, and he understood that it was not weakness. It had never been weakness. It was the most necessary thing in the world, and he had been refusing it for 34 years out of a fear so old and so structural that he had confused it for his personality. He picked up his phone. He did not call James Okafor. He called Claire. She answered after 2 rings. It was 6 in the morning. She answered, which meant she had been waiting, which meant she had known this was coming before he did. "She's gone," he said. Pause. "Oh, Callum. She left a letter." He stopped. He was standing in the nursery with the letter in his hand and the morning coming through the window that faced east. "Claire." His voice was not the voice he usually had. I've been an idiot." "Yes," Claire said with infinite gentleness. He stopped. He pressed his hand to the doorframe of the nursery. "I don't know how to." "Yes, you do," Claire said. "You know exactly how. You've just been refusing to." He was quiet. "She said she loves you," he said. "I know. In the letter. Callum." Claire's voice was very soft. "Do you love her?" The question sat in the empty nursery. He had not let himself ask it. He had been living beside it for months, orbiting it, refusing to look directly at it the way you don't look directly at the sun. He looked at it now. He thought about pasta on Wednesdays and the way she laughed and the fever and the 4 in the morning and the paint on her hands in Wolf Hall and the way she said, "I'm not asking you for anything," with the specific dignity of a woman who has decided she is going to ask for nothing from a person who does not know how to give, and who has sustained this decision at considerable personal cost for 7 months. "Yes," he said. It was the simplest thing he had ever said. And the most enormous. "Then go get her," Claire said. "Callum. Go." Chapter 21. Brooklyn. He did not go that day. He almost did. He was in the car, he had the address from the letter, and then he stopped. He told his driver to turn around. Not because he changed his mind. Because he understood that showing up at 6:45 in the morning was not the way to do this. Because he needed to be certain that what he was about to say was true. Not impulse, not the emotional amplitude of a letter read in a vacant nursery, but the actual true and settled thing. And because she deserved something that had been thought about, not something reactive. He spent the day at the office. He was, by all observable measures, entirely functional. His meetings were attended, his decisions were sound, his staff noted nothing unusual. He was, internally, doing something else entirely. Dismantling 7 years of careful structure and looking at what was underneath, which was not, as he had long suspected, a void, but something very much alive that had simply been building pressure for a very long time. He called Claire again in the evening. She was unhelpfully calm. "What are you going to say?" she asked. "The truth," he said. "Which is?" He thought about it. He thought about all the precise, controlled, exact language he had spent his professional life deploying, the economy of words, the specificity. He thought about what Nadia had said in her letter, that she knew he processed better when no one was watching. And he thought about the irony of the fact that for the first time in his life he wanted very much to say something in front of someone, not to have it land in ink on a page but in a room between them where she could see that he meant it. "I'm going to tell her I was wrong," he said. "That I have been afraid. That I am not, that I don't want to not feel things. That she is." He stopped. "That she is what?" Claire said gently. "That she is the person I want," he said. "Specifically. Not because of the baby. Not because of the arrangement. Because of her." Pause. He could hear Claire breathing. "Okay," she said, and her voice was slightly unsteady. "Hey. Go on a Friday." "Why Friday?" "Because she'll have been in the new place for 2 days and she won't have fully settled yet and she'll still be raw. Don't wait longer than that or she'll have started to seal everything over." He considered this. His sister knew things. "Friday," he said. "And Callum." "Yes. Don't be efficient about it. Don't brief. Don't manage. Just say it." He was quiet for a moment. I'll try. You'll do better than try, she said. You've been practicing for 7 months. He arrived in Brooklyn on a Friday morning at 9 o'clock with nothing in his hands. He had considered flowers and dismissed them as insufficient. He had considered a speech and dismissed that too for the same reason. He arrived with himself, which was all he had and all he had ever had, and which he had spent most of his life believing was not quite enough, and which he had decided finally, in the long hours between Wednesday and Friday, to offer anyway. The building was not what he was used to. It was solid and clean and slightly worn in the way of Brooklyn buildings. Brick, a stoop, window boxes on the first floor that had been planted by someone who cared about them. He buzzed the apartment. A silence. Then her voice through the intercom. Cautious, slightly wary, with the particular quality of someone who has been managing something large and is not sure they want it disturbed. Hello. It's Callum, he said. A longer silence. Callum. Yes. He heard her breathing through the intercom. He waited. 1 minute, she said. He waited. She came to the door in a soft gray sweater and jeans with Zara in her arms, and she looked at him with the composure she had always had, the steady directness that he had recognized at their very first meeting across a conference table as the quality he found most compelling in a person. Not performance, not strategy, but genuine self-possession. She was also visibly not unaffected by his being here. You should come in, she said finally. He came in. The apartment was small and full of morning light, and she had been there for 2 days and it already looked like hers. The prints on the walls, the plants on the windowsill, the easel in the corner with a canvas on it that was just beginning, a few marks, a suggestion. Rothko was on the couch looking at Callum with his default expression of territorial suspicion. She stood in the middle of the apartment with Zara and looked at him. He looked at her. I read the letter, he said. I assumed. I read it several times. She held his gaze. Waiting. She was very good at waiting. I told you I wasn't built for this, he said. I have believed that for a long time. Felt like an honest thing. An accurate self-assessment. He paused. He was not managing his delivery the way he managed things professionally. He was simply speaking. I was wrong. A breath from her. Very controlled. I am afraid, he said. I have been afraid for most of my adult life of exactly the thing that, of exactly what has been happening for the last 7 months, and I have been so successful at being afraid of it that I confused the fear with a personality trait. I believed I wasn't capable of it. I was wrong about that too. She hadn't moved. She was looking at him with the expressive face he had learned to read. The face that showed everything that she couldn't hide from even when she tried. And right now it was showing something that was trying very hard to stay carefully where it was and failing. I am not here to make a negotiation, he said. I am not here to present terms. I am here because you left and the apartment is. He stopped. He looked at her. You left and I stood in the nursery and I read what you wrote and I understood something that I should have understood a long time ago. What did you understand? She asked. Her voice was very steady. That the last 10%, he said, and she blinked because she didn't know the reference, but he kept going. The part of myself I have always kept back. The part one believed was locked. It's not locked. He paused. You have been walking around in it for months. The room was very quiet. Zara made a small sound and Nadia shifted her slightly, absently, eyes never leaving Callum. I love you, he said. Simply. Like he was reporting something he had verified and that was now simply true. I'm not good at this. I will be difficult probably in ways you've already experienced and in ways that will surprise both of us. I am not offering you a perfect thing. I am offering you the actual thing, which is all of me, the parts one know and the parts one don't, and a commitment to not protecting myself at the expense of you. He stopped. The silence stretched. Nadia looked at him for a very long moment. He watched her face. The composure, the self-possession, and underneath it, the thing that had always been there, that he had seen and not looked at directly, that was now fully visible and very large. You could have called, she said. I know. You could have come 2 days ago. I know. I needed to be certain. And are you? Yes, he said. Without hesitation. She looked at him. She looked down at Zara, who was gazing at the ceiling with the grand indifference of an infant who has no opinion on adult emotional decisions but is present for them. Then she looked back at him. You said you're not good at this, she said. I'm not. I know, she said. I've been living with you for 7 months. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile yet, but the possibility of one. I'm not asking you to be good at it, Callum. I'm asking you to try. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, close in the small apartment in the morning light. He looked at her and at Zara and at the expression on Nadia's face that was not yet the answer but was very close to it. I will try, he said. Every day. I will try. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, okay. Just that. Just okay. But she said it the way she said things when she meant them entirely. The way he had come to know was the truest version of her voice, and it landed in him with the weight of something that is going to change everything and knows it. He put his hand on her face, just his hand, her cheek, his thumb at the corner of her jaw, and she leaned into it the smallest amount, and he felt the baby between them and thought about everything that had happened to get here and how none of it was what either of them had planned and how, standing in this small bright apartment in Brooklyn on a Friday morning in August, he was more certain of exactly where he was supposed to be than he had ever been of anything in his life. Can I hold her? He asked. Nadia looked at him. And then finally she smiled. The real one, the one that was louder and more sudden and that he found every single time entirely and helplessly compelling. She placed Zara in his arms. Look. 1 year. They did not move back to the Upper East Side apartment immediately. This was initially Nadia's condition and then, as it turned out, Callum's preference as well. He came to Brooklyn on weekends and then on weekdays too, and then he was there more than he was at the apartment that had always been too large and too silent for the life he had been living in it, until eventually Nadia said, You know you practically live here, and he said, yes, and she said, we should probably do something about that, and he said, yes, and that was in its way the most romantic conversation either of them had ever had. They found a place together. A brownstone, also in Brooklyn, with enough room and the right light and a garden in the back that Nadia said was the reason and that Callum said was excessive, and that he spent a Saturday in October planting with the focused, competitive competence he brought to all manual tasks he'd never done before, while Zara watched from her bouncer on the back step with the profound interest of a 4-month-old discovering that the world contains gardens. He sold the Upper East Side apartment. He mentioned this to Nadia one morning as though it were unremarkable. You loved that apartment, she said. I lived in it, he said. That's different. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden. Is it? She asked. He turned to look at her. Yes, he said. I've been learning the difference. She kissed him. He was still learning how to be kissed without immediately managing the feeling, still learning that being managed and being loved were not the same thing, still, and always perhaps, a work in progress. But he was trying. Every day as promised. Claire came at Thanksgiving. She arrived at the Brooklyn brownstone with her husband Jeremy, and the two of them took one look at the house, at the prints on the walls and the art supplies in the corner and Rothko on the stairs and the garden visible through the back window and Zara on Callum's shoulder and Nadia at the stove, and Claire made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Don't, Callum said. I'm not doing anything, she said. You're doing the voice. Shut up and let me hug you, she said and did. He hugged her back. He was getting better at this. At dinner, with the table full and Zara in her high chair conducting an experiment with sweet potato that was generating strong results, Jeremy asked Nadia how they'd met. Nadia looked at Callum. Callum looked at Nadia. It's a long story, Nadia said. A hospital made a mistake, Callum said. The best kind of mistake, Nadia said. He looked at her. The gray eyes, direct and unguarded, without management, without the architecture of protection. Just him. Just this. Yes, he said. The best kind. And Zara, with the timing of someone who has been paying attention, knocked her sweet potato onto the floor and regarded the result with great satisfaction, and the table laughed, and outside the Brooklyn window the November city went about its evening, indifferent and eternal, full of mistakes that were corrections, full of unplanned things that were, in the end, the only things that mattered. This is not a story about a hospital making a mistake. This is a story about what happens after. About the long, difficult daily work of learning to be brave enough to want something and honest enough to say so. About a woman who decided that accidental did not mean unworthy. About a man who learned, at 34, that the door he had been guarding so carefully was not a door to a room he needed to protect, but a door to a room he needed to enter. About a little girl named Zara who will grow up knowing that she was wanted, fiercely, specifically, in all the ways that matter, by two people who found each other in the most improbable way and held on. Some mistakes are how the universe gets where it was always going. This was one of those. D&D. The Terms of Forever. A novel.